Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto had a political marriage with Big Mom's daughter, Charlotte Pudding, to save her? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Unlikely Proposition. The peace was a quiet thing. It settled over Konohagakure like the morning mist that clung to the great stone faces, a gentle and pervasive presence that could almost be mistaken for permanence. For Naruto Uzumaki, it was a sound, the distant, rhythmic thwack of kunai hitting wood at the academy, the cheerful haggling over vegetables in the market, the low hum of conversation from the ramen stand he could just see from his window. These were the sounds of a world not holding its breath, a world that had finally, blessedly, exhaled. He had fought a war for this quiet. He had bled for it. And now, as the acting Hokage, he was drowning in the paperwork it generated. Piles of it flanked him, miniature towers of mission reports, trade agreements, and infrastructure budgets. It was a foe more relentless than any Akatsuki member, a hydra that grew 2 new scrolls for every one he signed. He blew a stray strand of blonde hair from his face, the ink from his brush staining his fingertip. This was the part of the hero's journey they never showed in the stories. The endless, ink-stained aftermath. You know, a deep, rumbling voice echoed in the cavernous space of his mind. A familiar grumble that had been his companion for decades. For a world at peace, you certainly make a lot of work for yourself. You could delegate more. Naruto grinned, not looking up. From a particularly dense treaty with the Land of Waves concerning fishing tariffs. And let Shikamaru have all the fun. No way. He'd just complain about it being a drag, anyway. He wouldn't be wrong, Kurama retorted. The great fox's mental presence a comforting weight in his soul. This is a drag. Naruto was about to reply when a different sound cut through the village's quiet hum. It wasn't loud, but it was wrong. A low, vibrational thrumming that seemed to pull at the very air, making the sake in his cup tremble. It was a sound like a giant tearing a seam in the fabric of the world. He was on his feet in an instant. The half-signed scroll forgotten. The playful exhaustion vanished, replaced by the honed alertness of a warrior who had learned peace was a garden that must be constantly guarded. What was that? He murmured, moving to the window. The villagers below had stopped, their faces turned toward the sky, a mixture of confusion and a primal, half-forgotten fear. It is not chakra, Kurama stated, his own senses stretching out, a vast net of spiritual energy covering the entire village and beyond. Not from this world, at least. It feels greasy, unnatural. Before Naruto could process the words, the door to his office burst open. Ino Yamanaka stood there, her face pale, her usual confident demeanor replaced by a professional urgency. Naruto, the sensor division is in chaos. There's a hole opening up in the sky just beyond the western wall. He was already moving, shrugging on the iconic Hokage cloak. Get me Sasuke. Now. Tell Shino's teams to establish a perimeter but do not engage. Nobody goes near that thing until we know what we're dealing with. Her image flickered and vanished as she relayed the message through her clan's jutsu. Naruto was a blur, a flash of orange and white moving through the halls, his presence a calming force for the panicked Chunin and Jonin mobilizing around him. The thrumming grew louder as he reached the edge of the village, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in his bones. And then he saw it. It looked like a heat haze at first, a shimmering distortion in the air above the canopy of the forest. But it was growing, coalescing into a swirling vortex of impossible colors. It was not a portal he recognized, not a product of any space-time ninjutsu he had ever seen or heard of. It was a wound in reality, and something was about to bleed through. Sasuke appeared beside him in a swirl of leaves and lightning, his one visible eye narrowed, the deep purple of his Rinnegan already glowing with power. What is it? Kurama says it's not from our world. Naruto said, his voice grim. Feels wrong to you, too. Sasuke grunted in affirmation. It's like a door was kicked open, not unlocked. The vortex stabilized, its chaotic swirling slowing to reveal a shimmering, vertical tear in the sky. From its depths, a shape emerged. It was a ship, but a ship like none they had ever seen. It was a confectionery nightmare, a vessel of bright pinks and purples. its hull adorned with what looked like frosting and candy canes. A massive, grinning sun acted as its figurehead. It defied gravity, floating silently in the air 100 meters from the village wall. It was so absurd, so utterly alien, that for a moment, no one knew how to react. Then, a ramp lowered from the side of the garish vessel. Two figures began to walk down it, their forms strange and unsettling in the familiar light of the land of fire. One was tall and impossibly thin, dressed in a sharp suit with a cracked eggshell for a torso, a long-legged man who moved with a bizarre, bird-like grace. The other was shorter, bulkier, a man with the head of a lion, complete with a flowing mane and a pair of sunglasses perched on his snout. He wore a simple martial arts gi. They stopped at the bottom of the ramp, their feet hovering just above the ground. The Eggman spoke, his voice cultured and unnervingly calm, amplified by some unseen force. "Greetings to the inhabitants of this land. We come on behalf of our master, the Queen of Todo Land, the Emperor of the Sea, Mama, Mama." The Lion Man finished with a surprising roar. Charlotte Linlin, Naruto and Sasuke exchanged a look. Emperor of the Sea, Todo Land. The names meant nothing. This was not just a different village, it was a different world entirely. "I am Baron Tamago," the Eggman said with a slight, formal bow. "And this is Peckham's. We are here to deliver a proposition to your leader." Naruto stepped forward, his presence rolling out like a physical force, the immense, sun-bright chakra of a living legend. It was not threatening, but it was undeniable, a clear statement of power. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki. I'm in charge here. You've got my attention." Baron Tamago's visible eye widened slightly. A flicker of professional appreciation. He and Peckham's could feel it, the sheer scale of the energy radiating from the blonde man. It was like standing before a star. "Excellent, Monsieur Uzumaki. Our queen is a woman of grand appetites and grander ambitions. She has recently become aware of your world and its unique talents. She wishes to form an alliance." Shikamaru had arrived, melting out of the shadows to stand beside Naruto. "An alliance?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "Nations don't just appear out of thin air and ask to be friends. What's the catch?" Peckham's let out a low growl. "You should watch your tone when addressing emissaries of an emperor, Gao." Naruto held up a hand, silencing him. "It's a fair question. Alliances are built on trust and mutual benefit. We don't know you. You don't know us. What kind of alliance are we talking about?" Baron Tamago reached into his coat and produced a strange, snail-like object with a large screen on its back. He placed it on the ground, and it whirred to life, projecting a holographic image into the air between them. The image was of a room, a throne room of monstrous proportions, made of cake and candy. On the throne sat a woman of equally monstrous size. She was colossal, a mountain of a woman with a wild mane of pink hair, a malevolent grin stretched across her face. Her eyes, wide and hungry, aimed to see right through the projection, sizing them up like ingredients for a new dessert. The sheer force of her personality, her tyrannical presence, could be felt even through the grainy, flickering image. This was Charlotte Linlin, Big Mom. So, her voice boomed, scratching from the projector, yet shaking the very ground. "You're the famous ninja. Mama, you're smaller than I imagined." Naruto's eyes narrowed, his casual demeanor evaporating under the weight of her oppressive aura. "I get that a lot. My scouts have told me all about you," Big Mom continued, ignoring his comment. "Jutsu. Chakra, fascinating. A military power to rival my own. An army of warriors who can walk on water and breathe fire. I want it. I want an alliance between my kingdom of Todo Land and your, what do you call it? The allied shinobi forces. And what do we get out of this alliance?" Shikamaru pressed, his mind already racing, calculating the 1,000 different ways this could be a trap. Big Mom's grin widened, a terrifying sight. "You get to live. You get to avoid a war with me and my children. A war you cannot possibly win. But I am a benevolent queen. I prefer to join nations through blood, not through bloodshed. Alliances are best sealed with a wedding." A collective silence fell over the assembled shinobi. A wedding. The absurdity of the statement was so profound it bordered on insanity. "I have dozens of daughters." Big Mom boomed. "I will grant you one of their hands. You, Naruto Uzumaki. You will marry into my family. You will become my son." And our nations will be joined. Before anyone could react, she gestured off-screen. A smaller figure shuffled into view, her head bowed. The projection focused on her. She was a young woman with gentle, light brown eyes and hair to match, tied back in pigtails. She wore an elegant dress and held her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She looked delicate, beautiful, and absolutely, utterly terrified. "This is my 35th daughter, Charlotte Pudding," Big Mom announced, her voice dripping with a possessive pride. "She is a sweet girl, a master chocolatier. She will make you a fine wife. What do you say, boy? Marry my daughter, and we shall have peace. Refuse, and my fleet will turn your precious village into a crater of smoking ash." Mama. The projection showed Pudding flinching at her mother's laugh. She looked up, her eyes meeting Naruto's through the holographic screen. He saw the carefully constructed mask of a dutiful daughter, the practiced, gentle smile. But he also felt it. With the sage's power to sense emotions, he could feel the truth radiating from her like a cold wave. It was a maelstrom of fear, self-loathing, and a despair so deep it felt like a black hole. It was the emotional signature of a prisoner, of someone who had not known a single day of genuine happiness in her entire life. He saw a flicker of something else in her eyes, too, a desperate, silent plea. "Help me." The image of her burned itself into his mind. This wasn't a political negotiation. It was a hostage situation. The projection clicked off, leaving them in the stunned silence of the Konoha afternoon. Baron Tamago cleared his throat. "Our queen awaits your answer. You have 1 week." With that, he and Peckhams turned, walked back up the ramp, and their impossible ship retreated back into the shimmering rift, which then sealed itself with a final, sickening thrum, leaving behind nothing but the scent of ozone and burnt sugar. The Emergency Council was the tensest gathering since the height of the war. The 5 Cage were present via video link, their faces grim holograms flickering above the central table. In the room were Naruto, Kakashi, Shikamaru, Sasuke, and Sakura. The air was thick with disbelief and menace. "It's preposterous," declared the Raikage, his voice a thunderous growl even through the transmission. "This Emperor appears from another dimension and demands a marriage under threat of annihilation. We should be preparing for war, not a wedding. A war against an enemy we know nothing about," the Tsuchikage, Kuretsuchi, countered, her expression sharp. "We don't know their numbers, their capabilities, or even how to get to them. This woman commands ships that sail through the sky and can tear holes in reality. Rushing into a conflict is idiotic." The debate raged on, a whirlwind of strategic analysis and indignant pride. Shikamaru, as expected, laid out the grim logic. "It's a trap. It has to be. Best case scenario, they use this marriage as a foothold to learn our secrets and weaknesses before they invade. Worst case, the wedding itself is an ambush. Naruto would be walking into the lion's den. It's a terrible strategic move. The answer has to be no." Sakura slammed her hand on the table, her green eyes flashing with protective fire. "It's not a strategic move, Shikamaru, it's Naruto's life. We can't just marry him off to some stranger from another world to appease a tyrant. He deserves to be happy, to choose who he wants to be with. After everything he's done for us, for all of us, we can't ask this of him." Sasuke, who had been silent in the corner, finally spoke, his voice cutting through the noise. "You're all missing the point." Every eye turned to him. "Whether it's a trap or not is irrelevant. The fact is, they exist. This Big Mom and her empire. They have the ability to cross into our world. If we refuse, she will attack. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but she will. And it will be a war fought on our soil, against an enemy of unknown strength." He looked directly at Naruto. "If you go, you are on their soil. You control the engagement. It's a risk, but it's a calculated one. It turns a war of defense into an intelligence-gathering mission." It was cold, pragmatic, and typical of Sasuke. But he wasn't wrong. "So you want him to go?" Sakura asked, aghast. "I want to be prepared for the inevitable," Sasuke corrected. "And I would go with him." The room fell silent again, the weight of the decision pressing down on Naruto. He had been quiet through it all, his fingers steepled in front of him, his blue eyes distant. The arguments washed over him: strategy, freedom, risk, duty. But all he could see was the face of the girl on the screen. Charlotte Pudding. He could still feel the chill of her silent scream for help. That night, he stood on the balcony of the Hokage's office, the cool air doing little to soothe the turmoil inside him. He had fought monsters made of pure hatred, gods who sought to enslave humanity in a dream. He had brought peace to a world that had known nothing but war. And now, this, a choice that felt both impossibly large and deeply personal. They are right, you know, Kurama's voice rumbled, softer than usual. Both of them. Shikamaru is right that it's a trap. Sakura is right that it's unfair to you. And the Uchiha is right that it might be the most logical, if dangerous, path forward. What do you think I should do? Naruto asked the emptiness. I think you made up your mind the moment you saw that girl's eyes, the fox said, a note of resignation in his voice. You have always been a fool like that. You see a cage, and you have to break it. You see someone hurting, and you have to save them. It is your greatest strength and your most infuriating weakness. Naruto smiled faintly. Kurama knew him better than anyone. He wasn't thinking about grand strategy or political ramifications. He was thinking about a girl with sad eyes and a soul that felt like it was drowning. Big Mom had read him a political marriage to seal an alliance. But in doing so, she had unwittingly offered him a mission. She had pointed him to a person who needed saving. And for Naruto Uzumaki, that was a call he had never learned how to ignore. The next day, he reconvened the council. His friends and fellow leaders looked at him, their faces etched with worry. He looked tired, but his eyes held a familiar, unshakable resolve. I've made my decision, he said, his voice ringing with a calm authority that left no room for argument. I accept the proposal. A storm of protests erupted. Sakura was on her feet, pleading. The Raikage was roaring about the dishonor of it all. Shikamaru just closed his eyes, a pained expression on his face, as if he'd expected this but hoped he was wrong. Naruto raised his hand, and silence fell once more. I will not plunge our worlds into a war before we've even tried for peace, he stated, giving them the official, political reason. This is a chance to learn about them, to show them who we are. It's a risk, but it's one I have to take for the future. He looked at Sakura, his gaze softening. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. She didn't look convinced, but she subsided, biting her lip. I'll need a small team, Naruto continued, his eyes shifting to Sasuke. You're with me. I'll need your eyes and your ability to get us out if things go south. Sasuke gave a single, sharp nod. Shikamaru, Naruto said, turning to his brilliant advisor. I need you, too. I'll handle the fighting. You handle the thinking. Keep me from doing something too stupid. Shikamaru sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. What a drag. Fine. But if this goes wrong, I'm telling you, I told you so, from beyond the grave. Fair enough, Naruto said with a small smile. He paused, then added one more name. One that surprised everyone. And Hinata. The room blinked. Hinata. She was a powerful kunoichi, head of the Hyuga clan, but she was not a frontline brawler like Sasuke or a strategist like Shikamaru. Why her? Kakashi asked, his single visible eye curious. This is a political mission as much as anything, Naruto explained. It's about marriage. Hinata understands nobility, diplomacy, and tradition better than any of us. She's respected, and her Byakugan will see through any lie or disguise. She'll be our ambassador. And, he added, a little more quietly, she's a good friend. I'll need one there. The decision was made. The message was sent. Konoha, and the world, began to buzz with the unbelievable news. Their hero, the savior of the world, was getting married. To a pirate princess from another dimension. To stop a war that had not yet begun. As the sun set, casting long shadows from the great stone faces, Naruto stood on the monument that bore his father's likeness. He looked out at the lights of his home, the peaceful, quiet village he would be leaving behind. He was afraid. He wasn't afraid of Big Mom or her armies. He was afraid of the unknown. Of the cage he was about to walk into willingly. But that fear was eclipsed by the image of a girl with light brown hair and the soul of a prisoner. He had made a promise to himself long ago, a promise to never go back on his word. That was his ninja way. Now, he was making a new promise, a silent one spoken to a girl a universe away. I'm coming, and I'm getting you out. Far across the dimensions, in a land made of sweets and ruled by fear, a shadowy figure in a forgotten part of Whole Cake Island felt the pact being sealed. The connection between the two worlds strengthened, a metaphysical bridge solidifying. A low chuckle escaped its lips, a sound like grinding stones. The merger was accelerating. The seals were weakening. Soon, the gluttonous, whispering void would have a door wide enough to slip through. And it would feast on two worlds instead of one. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Lion's Den. The rift tore open a week later, not with the violent thrumming of its first appearance, but with a silent, deliberate precision, as if a key had finally been turned in a lock that was never meant to exist. On the other side was not the garish, candy-coated vessel from before, but a different ship. One bearing the same grinning sun figurehead but with a design that spoke more of a high-speed frigate than a floating party barge. It was a clear message. This was a transport, not an invasion fleet. A gesture of temporary trust. Naruto stood before the portal, flanked by his chosen team. He had traded his Hokage cloak for a more practical long coat, black with orange trim, some thing that allowed for movement but still held an air of authority. Sasuke was at his left, a dark, silent shadow, his single eye taking in every detail. To his right, Shikamaru stifled a yawn, his hands shoved in his pockets. But his mind was a whirlwind of calculations. Beside him, Hinata stood with a calm poise that belied the tension in her shoulders, her pale eyes already active, the veins around her temples subtly pronounced. "Ready for this?" Naruto asked, his voice low. "It's going to be a drag," Shikamaru muttered. "HN," was Sasuke's only reply. Hinata gave a firm nod. "With you, Naruto-kun." They walked towards the rift, the air growing thick and sweet, like stepping into a baker's kitchen. The world on the other side was a blast of color and sound. They stepped onto the deck of the ship, the wood beneath their feet feeling oddly springy, almost alive. The air was warm and humid, heavy with the scent of caramel and unknown blossoms. As the rift sealed behind them with a sound like tearing silk, the familiar green canopy of the Land of Fire was replaced by an impossible seascape. The ocean was not blue, but a vibrant, viscous purple juice, Naruto realized with a jolt. Isla, NDS in the distance were shaped like biscuits and tiered cakes, their shores made of what looked like white sand but was probably sugar. "Welcome aboard the Queen Mama chanter," a syrupy voice drawled. A man who seemed to be molded from melted candy leaned against the mast, a tall, impossibly thin figure in a striped coat, licking a massive lollipop. His tongue was grotesquely long. "I am Charlotte Perospero, Mama's eldest son. A pleasure to make your acquaintance, Perorin Tilda." His smile didn't reach his eyes. It was a predator's smile, all teeth and veiled intent. Naruto gave a nod, his own expression open and friendly. A deliberate contrast to the palpable hostility. "Naruto Uzumaki. Thanks for the ride." The journey was short and surreal. Homies, sentient objects with wide eyes and grinning faces, manned the ship. The sails sang a jaunty, repetitive tune, the clouds in the sky were puffs of spun sugar, and the sun itself seemed to be a living entity, beaming down at them with a wide, lazy smile. It was a child's fantasy brought to life, but underneath it all ran a current of wrongness. The smiles of the homies were fixed and manic. The sweetness in the air was cloying, suffocating. Tea was a paradise built on a foundation of absolute control. "This place reeks of stolen souls," Kurama grumbled in Naruto's mind. "That woman's power. It's a grotesque mockery of the sage's creation of all things." Hinata leaned closer to Naruto, her voice a whisper. "Their life force, it's in everything. The ship, the clouds, it's all around us. But it feels thin, stretched." They were being watched, not just by Perospero and the handful of other Charlotte siblings on the ship, but by the island itself as they approached. Whole Cake Island rose from the purple sea like a monument to madness, a massive, multi-layered cake dripping with frosting mountains and chocolate rivers. At its pinnacle stood the Whole Cake Chateau, a castle so enormous it seemed to pierce the candy floss clouds. As they disembarked, stepping onto a dock made of hardened syrup, a welcoming party stood waiting. It was a collection of the strangest, most intimidating people Naruto had ever seen. Dozens of them, all bearing some resemblance to the colossal woman from the projection. They were the Charlotte family. Big Mom herself was not there. In her place stood a man who towered over everyone else, a quiet giant with sharp, magenta eyes and a long scarf that covered the lower half of his face. His presence was immense, a focused, disciplined pressure that was a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of his siblings. His gaze locked onto Naruto, and it felt like being pierced by two red-hot needles. "So this is him," the giant said, his voice a low, calm baritone that somehow carried over the chatter of his family. Perospero glided to his side. "Indeed, Katakuri, this is our future brother-in-law, Naruto Uzumaki." The man, Katakuri, took a step forward. His eyes flickered between Naruto, Sasuke, Shikamaru, and Hinata. His assessment swift and unnervingly accurate. He could feel their power, could see the tightly coiled readiness in their stances. "You are strong," he stated, not as a compliment, but as a fact. "Stronger than I expected." His gaze lingered on Naruto. But strength alone means little here. Naruto met his stare without flinching. "Good thing I brought more than just strength." A.R. Ipple of unease went through the assembled Charlottes. They were used to bluster and fear. This calm, confident defiance was new. They were led through the city, a bustling metropolis of gingerbread houses and cookie-paved streets, populated by a menagerie of races Naruto had only read about in stories. Humans, fishmen, minks, long-limbed and long-necked people, all living together. It was the utopia Big Mom had boasted of. But Shikamaru noticed the details. The fixed, slightly too wide smiles on the citizens' faces. The way they scurried out of the path of any of the Charlotte children. This wasn't harmony, it was terrified obedience. The chateau was even more overwhelming from the inside. They were ushered into a grand hall, a ballroom of absurd proportions where the very walls seemed to be edible. And there, on a throne large enough to seat a small mountain, was Big Mom. Her physical presence was 100 times more potent than her projection. It was a gravitational force, bending the will of everyone in the room towards her. Her eyes, wide and manic, fixed on Naruto, a hungry glint in their depths. "Mama, so you came. You have courage, I'll give you that. Welcome to my kingdom, son-in-law." Naruto felt the oppressive weight of her conqueror's haki wash over him, a wave of pure intimidation designed to make lesser men faint. He stood his ground, his own chakra flaring, just enough to create a protective bubble around his team, neutralizing the effect. It was a subtle act, a quiet defiance that did not go unnoticed. Big Mom's grin widened. She liked her toys to have a bit of fight in them. "Bring in my daughter," she boomed. A set of smaller doors opened, and Charlotte Pudding entered. She was even more lovely in person, her movements graceful, her smile gentle. She curtsied perfectly, a picture of demure elegance. "Welcome to Toto Land, Lord Uzumaki. It is an honor." She played the part to perfection. But as she looked up at him, her light brown eyes meeting his, Naruto's senses screamed. The storm of fear and misery he had felt from her projection was now a raging hurricane. It was so intense it was a physical effort for him to keep his own friendly expression from faltering. He saw the subtle tremor in her hands, the microscopic flicker of panic in her eyes before it was expertly masked. He stepped forward, taking her offered hand. It was cold as ice. "The honor is all mine. Lady Pudding, please, just Naruto is fine." He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that had disarmed enemies and won over nations. He didn't let go of her hand right away. Instead, he looked at the intricate chocolate flowers pinned in her hair. "Your work. I've heard you're an amazing chocolatier. These are incredible. The detail is perfect." Pudding froze. It was for less than a second. But Naruto felt it, a jolt of pure shock that momentarily silenced the hurricane of her emotions. People complimented her looks, her station, her obedience. No one had ever complimented her work. They saw the princess, the political pawn. He had seen the artist. She quickly recovered, her practiced smile returning, but the mask had cracked, just for an instant. Thank you," she stammered, gently pulling her hand away. "You are too kind." He had gotten through, just a little. It was a start. The welcoming feast was, as Shikamaru had predicted, a battlefield disguised as a party. The long, banquet-style table was laden with a feast that defied imagination. Living appetizers sang on their plates before being devoured, a roast pig cried tears of delicious gravy, and the wine. was a sparkling river that flowed from a fountain in the center of the room. Naruto was seated at the head of the table, between Big Mom and Pudding. His team was seated nearby, surrounded on all sides by the upper echelon of the Charlotte family. The tests began subtly. Charlotte Oven, a massive man who radiated intense heat, placed a goblet of steaming liquid in front of Naruto. "A Toto Land specialty," he said. His voice a low rumble. "Boiling fruit juice. A true man's drink." Naruto picked up the steaming goblet, its metal hot enough to sear skin, and drank it down in one go without a flicker of discomfort. Much to Oven's visible surprise. "Delicious," Naruto said cheerfully. "A little on the cool side for my taste, though." Next came a challenge of a different sort. Daifuku, a stern-looking man with a prominent topknot, began to grill Shikamaru on Konoha's military strength and economic policies, his questions sharp and designed to trap the unwary. Shikamaru, feigning laziness, answered each query with vague, non-committal responses that revealed absolutely nothing, frustrating Daifuku to no end. Meanwhile, Hinata, under the guise of polite conversation with some of the Charlotte daughters, used her Byakugan to map out the entire chateau, identify hidden passages, and analyze the chakra, or haki, as she was beginning to understand it, of every person in the room. Sasuke simply sat and ate, a silent, menacing presence that dared anyone to approach him. His very stillness was a more effective deterrent than any threat. The main event began when a man with a wild, 3S actioned pompadour and an arrogant smirk on his face slammed his hands on the table. He was Charlotte Cracker, the 10th son, one of Big Mom's 3 sweet commanders. "Enough with the pleasantries," he announced, drawing all attention. "Mama, if this shrimp is going to marry into our family, we need to know if he can fight. All this talk of him being a hero is just that, talk. I want to see it for myself." Big Mom let out a booming laugh. Mama, an excellent idea. I am also curious. Naruto Uzumaki, my son, Cracker, wishes to test your strength in a friendly spar. What do you say?" Her tone made it clear that refusal was not an option. Naruto wiped his mouth with a napkin and stood up, a playful glint in his eye. "A friendly spar? Sure, why not? I could use a little exercise to work off all this amazing food." The feast hall was cleared, creating a wide arena in the center of the room. Cracker stood opposite Naruto, drawing his massive double-edged sword, Pretzel. "Don't cry when you lose, pretty boy," he sneered. "Wouldn't dream of it," Naruto replied, not even bothering to enter a fighting stance. Cracker shot forward, a blur of motion, his sword swinging in a deadly arc. Naruto simply sidestepped, the massive blade missing him by an inch. Cracker pressed his attack, a furious barrage of strikes, but Naruto evaded each one with an almost lazy grace, like a leaf on the wind. He wasn't even looking at Cracker. He was looking at his sword, his feet, his shoulders, reading his every move before it was made. "Stand still," Cracker roared in frustration. He clapped his hands together, and from his body, a figure began to emerge, a large, multi-limbed warrior made of biscuit. It was hard as steel and wielded 8 biscuit swords. "Behold the might of my Bisu no Mi," Cracker shouted from within his puppet. "My biscuit soldiers are invincible." The soldier charged. Naruto, still smiling, held up a single finger. Shadow Clone Jutsu. In a series of smokeless puffs, the room was filled. Not with 10 clones, or 100, but with 1,000 Narutos. The Charlotte family stared in shock, their jaws collectively on the floor. The 1,000 clones, each one a perfect, solid replica, swarmed the biscuit soldier. Rasengan. They all shouted in unison. 1,000 swirling blue orbs of chakra lit up the room like a miniature sun. The resulting explosion of sound and force was deafening. The invincible biscuit soldier was not just broken, it was obliterated, reduced to a shower of fine, sugary crumbs that rained down on the stunned onlookers. Before the last of the crumbs had even settled, the real Naruto appeared directly in front of the now exposed and shocked Cracker. He didn't punch him. He didn't hit him with a Rasengan. He simply poked him in the forehead with 2 fingers. The force of the poke, amplified by a minuscule, perfectly controlled burst of chakra, sent Cracker flying backward across the room, where he crashed into the far wall and slid to the floor, unconscious. Silence. The entire exchange had taken less than 30 seconds. Naruto hadn't even broken a sweat. He had dismantled one of Big Mom's top commanders with the casual ease of someone swatting a fly. He dusted off his hands and turned back to the table. Well, that was a fun warm-up. Is there any of that pie left? The playful tone did nothing to hide the terrifying message he had just sent. This is me not trying. From the head of the table, Big Mom's grin had vanished, replaced by a look of intense, avaricious interest. This was more power than she had ever dreamed of. She had to have it. Pudding stared at Naruto, her heart hammering in her chest. She had seen countless men, strong men, pirates and warriors, crumble before her family's might. She had just watched this strange, kind-eyed boy from another world effortlessly humiliate one of her most powerful brothers, and he'd done it with a smile on his face. For the first time in a very long time, a tiny, fragile seed of something she had thought long dead began to sprout in the barren soil of her heart, hope. But it was Katakuri's reaction that was the most telling. He had not moved, had not spoken a word. He had watched the entire fight with an unnerving stillness. His advanced observation haki, which allowed him to see a few seconds into the future, had been useless. Not because Naruto was too fast, but because Naruto's movements were too fluid, too unpredictable. He had seen a dozen possible outcomes, and Naruto had chosen a 13th. Their eyes met across the room. Naruto's cheerful mask was gone, replaced by a steady, serious gaze. A silent challenge passed between them, an acknowledgement of the other's power. This was not over. This was only the beginning. Later, as they were shown to their lavish, cake-themed guest quarters, Shikamaru finally let out a long, slow breath. Well, he said, collapsing into a plush armchair that looked like a cupcake. That certainly made an impression. You think? Naruto said, stretching his arms. I thought I was pretty subtle. Sasuke scoffed from his position by the window, from which he was already mapping escape routes. You're as subtle as a tailed beast bomb. They're afraid, Hinata added softly, her Byakugan deactivated. Under all the arrogance and pride, there's fear. Especially from the ones who aren't at the very top. They fear their mother, and now, they fear you. Naruto's expression grew serious. Good. Fear leads to mistakes, and we're going to need them to make a few if we're going to get pudding out of here. He looked out the window, past the candy cane bars, at the sweet, saccharine, suffocating prison that was Toto Land. He had won the first battle of wills, but he was deeper in the lion's den than ever before. The roars of the welcoming party had faded, and now, in the quiet, he could hear the sound of the cage door swinging shut. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Third Eye's Secret. Sleep was a luxury Naruto couldn't afford. The lavish guest room, with its meringue pillows and spun sugar canopy bed, felt more like a beautifully decorated cage than a place of rest. Every shadow seemed to hold a silent observer. Every sweet scent in the air felt like a thin veil over a deeper rot. Sasuke was a statue of vigilance by the window, his presence a comfort but also a stark reminder of their precarious position. Shikamaru was feigning sleep on a velvet chaise lounge, but Naruto could sense the frantic, brilliant energy of his mind at work, processing the day's intelligence, formulating 100 different plans. Hinata was in a separate, adjoining room, her quiet meditation a focused shield of sensory awareness. But it was Pudding's face that haunted Naruto's thoughts. The flicker of shock when he'd complimented her craft. The crushing weight of the fear he felt pouring from her. He had made a crack in her armor, but it wasn't enough. He had to get through to her, alone. The feast was a public performance. He needed a private conversation. This is reckless, Kurama's voice rumbled, a low thrum of disapproval. You don't know the layout of this castle. You don't know who is watching. You are the primary target. And she's the primary prisoner, Naruto whispered back, swinging his legs off the bed. If we're going to turn this situation around, I need her on our side. Genuinely on our side. He slipped out of his coat, moving with a silence that defied his bright orange and black attire. He wasn't a natural infiltrator like Sasuke, but years of evading Anbu and surprising powerful enemies had taught him a thing or two. He pressed his hand to the floor, closing his eyes and extending his senses. He filtered out the thousands of life forces in the castle, the bizarre, stolen energy of the homies. The powerful signatures of the Charlotte siblings. He searched for hers, for that unique, Fractured energy signature, that maelstrom of fear wrapped around a core of quiet strength. He found it, not in the opulent wing where the family's quarters were located, but deeper within the chateau, in a more secluded, less patrolled section. Idiot, Kurama sighed, but there was no real heat in it. The fox knew this was inevitable. Naruto flowed out of the room like a ghost, a flicker of motion in the corner of a homie's eye, a whisper of wind down a hallway made of gingerbread. He moved through the surreal, edible architecture, his senses guiding him toward her. The air grew warmer, the scent of sugar being replaced by the rich, deep aroma of roasting cacao. He stopped before a simple, undecorated door, a stark contrast to the flamboyant decor surrounding it. This was it. There were no guards. No one expected anyone to come here. This place was hers. He didn't knock. He simply opened the door and stepped inside. The room was a workshop. It was warm and alive, a chaotic, beautiful mess of copper pots, marble slabs, and half-finished chocolate sculptures. It was the only place He had seen in the entire chateau that felt real, that felt human. And in the center of it all stood Pudding, her back to him. She had shed her formal dress for a simpler apron, smudged with chocolate. Her hair was tied back messily, and she was meticulously piping delicate, lacy wings onto a chocolate swan. She was so engrossed in her work that she hadn't heard him enter. He watched for a moment, silent. Here, in her sanctuary, the raging storm of her emotions was calmer, a low, melancholic hum instead of a hurricane. This was the only place she could breathe. The wings are beautiful, he said softly. Pudding yelped, spinning around, a piping bag clutched in her hand like a weapon. Her eyes were wide with panic, the carefully constructed mask of the demure princess completely gone. Seeing him, the cause of her family's current tension, the foreign prince who had humiliated her brother, her fear skyrocketed. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice trembling. "You're not supposed to be here. This place is private." "I know. I'm sorry for intruding," Naruto said, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. He took a slow step into the room, his eyes not on her, but on the creations around them. A miniature chocolate carousel with perfectly sculpted horses. A cityscape where the buildings were intricate blocks of dark and white chocolate. "This is amazing. You made all of this." His genuine admiration was a language her fear didn't know how to counter. It confused her, threw her off balance. "What do you want?" she demanded, trying to regain her footing. "Did my mother send you? Are you here to gloat about what you did to Cracker?" "No," Naruto said simply, his blue eyes finally meeting hers. They were clear and steady, with no hint of arrogance or menace. "I came to talk to you. Away from all of them." That was the wrong thing to say. The idea of being cornered, of a private conversation with this impossibly powerful man, sent a fresh wave of terror through her. Her mind raced, falling back on the only defense mechanisms she had ever known, deception and cruelty. She had to drive him away. She had to make him hate her, to see the monster she truly was so he would leave her alone. Her expression twisted, the fear hardening into a sneer. "Talk. You want to talk," she laughed, a high, brittle sound that didn't sound like her at all. "All right, fiancé, let's talk." She stalked towards him, her movements losing their earlier grace, becoming sharp and aggressive. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Walking in here, acting all nice and charming. You think you've figured me out." Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial, mocking whisper. "You have no idea what you've walked into." She stopped directly in front of him, so close he could see the frantic pulse in her throat. With a dramatic flourish, she swept her bangs aside, and revealed her third eye. It sat in the center of her forehead, a deep, crimson orb with a vertically slit pupil. It was jarring, unnatural, and it stared at him with an intelligence all its own. In that same instant, her entire demeanor shifted. The sweet girl was gone, burned away by a personality so twisted and mocking it was like a caricature of a villain. Surprised, she cackled, her voice now a grating, taunting sing-song. "What's the matter, hero? Don't you like what you see? This is me, the real me. I'm Mama's favorite little monster." She began to circle him like a shark, her movements theatrical and unnerving. "Oh, the wedding. You're going to love the wedding. It's going to be a real showstopper." She leaned in close, her breath hot on his ear. "When you lean in to kiss your blushing bride, I'm going to pull out a special, candy-coated revolver and splatter your brains all over the altar. And when you fall, my darling brothers and sisters will slaughter your friends. We'll take your power, your secrets, your entire pathetic little world, and it will all be a new jewel in Mama's crown." She pulled back, her face a mask of manic glee, her 3 eyes staring at him, waiting for the disgust, the horror, the anger. She was showing him the absolute worst part of herself, the source of a lifetime of torment and ridicule. Combining it with a confession of the most profound betrayal. She was trying to wound him, to drive him away with pure, unfiltered ugliness. Naruto was silent. He didn't move. He just looked at her. His expression unreadable. "What's the matter?" she taunted, her smile faltering slightly at his lack of reaction. "Cat got your tongue. Are you horrified? Disgusted? Go on, say it. Tell me how much of a freak I am." He didn't. He just kept looking, not at her sneering face, but directly at her third eye. His gaze was so intense, so focused, it was as if he was trying to see into her very soul. Then, he spoke, his voice quiet and utterly sincere. "It's beautiful." The word hung in the air, a single, impossible note in a symphony of madness. Pudding froze. Her mocking smile vanished. Her 3 eyes blinked. What did you say?" "Your eye," Naruto clarified, taking a half step closer. "It's a beautiful color. Like a ruby." That was it. That was the blow her defenses could not withstand. Not violence, not anger, but a simple, profound, and absolute acceptance of the one thing she believed made her unlovable. The cruelty in her face didn't just fade, it shattered, like a porcelain mask dropped on a stone floor. The manic energy drained out of her, leaving her looking small and lost. Her bottom lip trembled, her 3 eyes filled with tears. "No," she whispered, a choked, broken sound. "It's not. It's hideous. I'm a monster." "No, you're not," Naruto said, his voice impossibly gentle. "You're just a person who's been hurt so badly that you think being a monster is the only way to protect yourself." A sob tore its way out of her chest, a raw, ragged sound of a lifetime of pain being uncaged. The strength went out of her legs, and she collapsed, sinking to the floor. Naruto knelt in front of her, giving her space but staying close. She curled into a ball, her body racked with shuddering sobs, her hands covering her face as if to hide her shame. "Everyone, my whole life," she cried, her words fragmented by her tears. "Mama, my own mother, she told me to hide it. She called me a freak. My brothers, they threw rocks at me, they said I was disgusting. I just wanted them to stop. I just wanted someone, anyone." He listened. He didn't offer empty platitudes or easy comforts. He just listened, letting her pour out all the poison she had been forced to hold inside for so many years. He felt the full, unfiltered truth of her suffering, and it resonated with a painful familiarity. He knew what it was to be feared and hated for something you couldn't control. When the storm of her sobs finally subsided into exhausted, hitching breaths, she looked up at him, her 3 eyes red and swollen. The mocking persona was gone. The demure princess was gone. All that was left was a terrified, heartbroken young woman. "The plan, it's all true," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "At the wedding, they're going to kill you all. My memo fruit powers, I can edit memories. I was supposed to be the one to create an opening, to make you vulnerable. I can snip out a person's memory and replace it with another. It's why I'm useful to her." The self-loathing in her voice was a physical thing. "Pudding," Naruto said, his voice firm but kind, drawing her gaze. "Look at me. I'm not my world's pawn. And you are not your mother's tool." He reached out, not to touch her, but just holding his hand in the space between them. "I'm going to get you out of this. I promise." Her eyes widened. It wasn't a promise of a political alliance or a strategic victory. It was a promise for her. For her freedom. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help me?" "Because," he said, giving her a small, sad smile. "I know what it's like to be alone. And no one should have to feel like that." For the first time, a genuine emotion, one not born of fear or deception, flickered across her face. It was a fragile, tentative sprout of trust. She nodded, a barely perceptible movement. A secret was now shared between them. An alliance had been forged, not in a council room, but here, on a chocolate-dusted floor, between two broken people from different worlds. Miles away, in the cold, stone underbelly of the chateau, Shikamaru Nara was not admiring chocolate. He had extended his shadow, a sliver of darkness slithering through cracks in the floorboards, down ventilation shafts. Exploring the castle's hidden arteries. What he found was more horrifying than any overt display of power he had seen so far. He saw the collection rooms. Citizens of Toto Land, their faces blank with resignation, lined up before strange, spectral homies. He watched, through his shadow's remote view, as a month, 6 months, a year of their lifespan was drawn from them in wisps of glowing energy. He saw that energy being fed into inanimate objects, bringing them to life as chess pieces, teacups, and paving stones. Big Mom's utopia wasn't just built on fear, it was powered by the literal life force of her people. They were not citizens, they were fuel. His mind, always a step ahead, connected the dots with chilling clarity. This wasn't just a kingdom. It was a factory, a soul-devouring engine. Escape wasn't just a matter of saving Naruto and Pudding. It was a moral imperative. And it would require a plan of such audacious, chaotic brilliance that it would shake the very foundations of this candy-coated nightmare. A small, grim smile touched his lips. What a drag. He loved it. Back in the workshop, a fragile peace had settled. Naruto had helped Pudding to her feet. The promise still hung in the air between them. A silent vow. As he turned to leave, Naruto paused at the door, sensing something he'd noticed earlier, but could now identify in the quiet. A faint, unnatural, malevolence clinging to the energy of some of Pudding's siblings, far off in the castle. It was a dark, whispering static under their normal auras. Your family, he said, his brow furrowed. The gel, Owzy they have for you, it feels twisted. Amplified, somehow. Pudding hugged her arms, looking down. They've always been jealous of Mama's favor, even when it's just for a plan. Lately, some of them have been crueler. More paranoid. Naruto's eyes narrowed. It was the same greasy, unnatural feeling he'd sensed from the rift, but on a microscopic scale, clinging to the negative emotions of others like a parasite. A seed of a far greater threat, already taking root in the cracks of the Charlotte family's dysfunction. This was bigger than just Big Mom. He gave Pudding one last reassuring nod. Get some rest. From now on, you're not alone in this. He slipped out, leaving her in the warm, chocolate-scented silence of her sanctuary. She stood motionless for a long time, then slowly raised a hand to her forehead. Her fingers gently tracing the outline of her third eye. She looked at her reflection in a polished copper pot. For the first time in her life, she didn't see a monster. She saw a girl who had just been handed a chance. And it was terrifying, and it was wonderful. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A Symphony of Deception. The morning of the wedding dawned a grotesque, saccharine pink. A nervous energy, sharp and sweet as rock candy, pulsed through the whole cake chateau. In his guest chambers, Naruto stood as attendants fitted him with the ceremonial garb of a Toto Land groom, a ridiculous, frilled tuxedo of pure white. He felt less like a groom and more like a sacrificial lamb being dressed for the slaughter. You were remarkably calm for a man walking to his own execution, Kurama noted. His mental voice a low rumble of amusement and tension. Naruto adjusted the tight collar, his eyes meeting his own reflection in the polished mirror. The calm was a mask, but it was a sturdy one. Beneath it, his senses were stretched taut, every nerve ending alive with sage energy, feeling the thrum of the thousands of souls in the chateau, the coiled power of his enemies, the frantic, terrified heartbeat of his ally. The plan's a good one, Kurama, Naruto sent back, his thoughts a quiet stream. Shikamaru cooked it up. It's got 1,000 moving parts. Shikamaru's plans always have 1,000 moving parts. The fox grumbled. It's the one part that always explodes that worries me. That's my job, Naruto replied with a grim smile. Across the chateau, Pudding was a living doll in the hands of her sisters. They fluttered around her, adjusting her veil, tightening her corset, their words a flurry of syrupy compliments laced with the acid of envy. Amanda, her long-necked sister, ran a finger along the seam of Pudding's dress. Mama will be so pleased, Pudding. Don't mess this up. The threat was unspoken but clear. Pudding kept her smile in place, the sweet, nervous bride she had played for a lifetime. But today, the role felt different. It was not a cage, but a costume. Her mind was a sea of calm. Naruto's promise echoed in her thoughts. You're not alone in this. For the first time, she wasn't acting out of fear, but out of purpose. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not with terror, but with a wild, exhilarating treason. Elsewhere, the rest of Naruto's team made their own silent preparations. Shikamaru sat on the floor, a miniature shogi board before him, the pieces laid out in a complex, aggressive formation. He wasn't playing a game, he was visualizing a war. Sasuke stood by a window, cleaning the pristine blade of his Kusanagi sword with a soft cloth. He moved with an economy of motion that bordered on stillness, a panther conserving energy before the pounce. In her room, Hinata knelt in meditation, her Byakugan active. She wasn't just mapping the chateau anymore. She was mapping the flow of the battle to come, her mind a placid lake reflecting the brewing storm. Ready to pinpoint the first ripple of malicious intent. They were separate, yet united in a silent, deadly accord. The ceremony was to take place on the chateau's highest rooftop, a vast, open-air plaza with a view of all of Todo land. The altar was a monument to Big Mom's ego, a 10-tiered wedding cake of colossal size, upon which they were meant to exchange vows. The GUSTs were a rogues gallery of the New World's most infamous criminals and power brokers, all gathered to witness the union of two great powers, and the expected subjugation of one by the other. Naruto stood on the top tier of the cake, waiting. The wind whipped at his ridiculous suit. Below him, the Charlotte family was assembled in full, a vibrant and deadly sea of power. His eyes found his friends. Sasuke, Shikamaru, and Hinata stood in places of honor near the front, surrounded, but unbowed. Their positioning was exact, a key part of the plan. Then, the music began. It was a jaunty, almost manic tune played by a band of homies. Big Mom appeared, a terrifying mountain of pink, and on her arm was Pudding. She looked ethereal in her white gown, a tragic and beautiful marionette. As they began the long walk up the stairs of the wedding cake, her eyes, wide and seemingly nervous, met Naruto's. It was in that look that the silent conversation took place. He saw the hurricane of fear, but beneath it now, a core of steely resolve. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible dip of his head. Are you ready? Her hand, clutching her bouquet of edible flowers, tightened just a fraction. I am. The moment was a fragile, secret thing. A bubble of truth in an ocean of lies. They stood before the officiant, the head chef Striason, whose words droned on, a meaningless preamble to the violence everyone knew was coming. Big Mom loomed over them, her grin wide and voracious. Katakuri stood nearby, his arms crossed, his crimson eyes fixed on Naruto. His future sight was a chaotic storm of possibilities. But they all ended in the blonde ninja's blood staining the white frosting of the cake. It was an unavoidable future. Do you, Charlotte Pudding, take this man to be your husband? Striason asked. I do, Pudding whispered, her voice a perfect imitation of a shy bride. And do you, Naruto Uzumaki? Naruto didn't hear the rest. His senses were screaming. The killing intent in the air was so thick he could taste it. He saw the glint of metal under the priest's robes. He saw Oven's hands begin to glow with heat. He felt the shift in Katakuri's stance as he prepared to launch a jellybean with the speed and force of a cannonball. To be your lawfully wedded husband. I do, Naruto said, his voice clear and calm. Striason smiled, a rotten, black-toothed thing. Then you may kiss the bride. This was the signal. This was the moment of betrayal. Naruto leaned in, his face just inches from Pudding's. Her eyes were wide, playing her part to perfection. Time seemed to warp, the manic music fading into a low hum. He could see the priest reaching into his coat. He could see Perospero forming a candy weapon. The world held its breath. And Naruto winked. Sorry, he whispered, his voice for her ears only. Hate to interrupt the kiss, but we've got some party crashers. In the split second that the priest's pistol cleared his robes, a puff of smoke erupted directly behind him. A perfect shadow clone of Naruto. One that had been hidden in plain sight as a decorative cherub on the cake, slammed the butt of a kunai into the priest's wrist. The gun clattered to the frosting-covered floor. Simultaneously, chaos erupted, but it was not the chaos Big Mom had planned. All around the rooftop plaza, dozens of decorative flowers, pillars, and even waiters exploded into puffs of smoke. revealing dozens more of Naruto's shadow clones. Each one appeared directly beside a key member of the Charlotte family, a Rasengan already forming in their palm. The symphony of deception had met its counter-movement. Big Mom's roar of fury was the conductor's downbeat for a new, violent orchestra. What? Kill them. Kill them all. The battle exploded. It wasn't a messy brawl. It was a series of precise, violent engagements. Before the first droplets of blood could even be spilled, Katakuri moved. He was a blur, appearing between Naruto and the rest of his family, his leg extending, coated in hardened, weaponized mochi. I foresaw this betrayal, Katakuri said, his voice dangerously calm as his attack whistled through the air. But I also foresaw you dying. Naruto, now glowing with the orange pigment of sage mode around his eyes, met the kick with his forearm, the impact cracking the frosting beneath their feet. Your future sight's a little fuzzy today, he shot back, shoving Katakuri away and creating space. Their duel began, a vortex of violence at the heart of the storm. Katakuri was a force of nature, his mochi fruit allowing him to be both fluid and unbreakably hard. He predicted Naruto's moves, countering punches before they were thrown, his body contorting to avoid attacks. But Sage Mode gave Naruto something Katakuri's future sight couldn't fully comprehend: natural energy. It made his reactions faster, his instincts sharper, his movements a part of the world itself, not just a man moving through it. For every future Katakuri saw, Naruto's unpredictable, clone-heavy style presented three new, equally plausible possibilities. While the two titans clashed, the rest of the stage lit up. Sasuke became a wraith of lightning and black fire. He had marked Oven and Daifuku as his targets. Oven blasted him with a wave of searing heat, but Sasuke's Rinnegan flared. In a flicker of displaced space, he swapped places with Daifuku's massive, summoned genie. Genie took the full force of the heat blast, roaring in pain and anger, turning on its own master. Before they could recover, Sasuke was upon them, his Chidori-laced sword a blur, not aiming to kill, but to systematically cripple. Targeting joints and pressure points with surgical, brutal precision. Hinata moved like a dancer in the heart of a hurricane. The massive sweet commander, Charlotte Smoothie, towered over her, swinging a giant sword dripping with a strange, dehydrating liquid. But Hinata was untouchable. She flowed under the blade, her open palms striking with the focused, devastating power of the gentle fist. 8 trigrams 64 palms. Her voice was a calm, clear bell. A flurry of strikes landed on Smoothie's torso, not bruising the skin, but blocking the flow of her energy, causing her devil fruit power to sputter and fail. For the first time, the imposing commander found herself on the defensive against a woman a fraction of her size. And amidst it all were the two strategists. Shikamaru stood near the edge of the fray, his hands in his pockets, his expression one of pure boredom, which only meant his mind was operating at 1000%. His shadow stretched, thin and sharp, not to bind large targets, but to trip feet, to momentarily ensnare a hand holding a weapon, to create the split-second openings that Naruto's clones and his friends exploited with lethal efficiency. Pudding was the wild card, the ghost in her own family's machine. As the battle raged, she played the part of the terrified bride, stumbling through the chaos. She, accidentally, bumped into Perospero as he was forming a massive candy spear to impale a group of Naruto clones. "Oh, brother, I'm so sorry," she cried, her hand touching his arm for just a second. In that touch, her power flared. She didn't erase a major memory, just a small one. She snipped away his memory of how to maintain the spear's structural integrity. The magnificent weapon dissolved into sticky goo in his hands, leaving him bewildered for a crucial moment. She moved on, a butterfly of sabotage, stumbling into one sibling to make them forget their orders, brushing past another to make them momentarily forget who their allies were. Each touch was a quiet, devastating act of rebellion, turning her family's greatest asset, their numbers, into a liability. The clash between Naruto and Katakuri reached a fever pitch. Rasengan met strength mochi, the resulting shockwave blasting a crater in the giant wedding cake, sending tears of sponge and frosting raining down on the combatants below. They broke apart, breathing heavily, facing each other across the wreckage. "You are strong," Katakuri admitted, his voice holding a sliver of grudging respect. "But you cannot protect everyone. My mother's will is absolute." Is that what you call this? Naruto shot back, gesturing to the chaos, to Pudding who was cowering behind a pillar, playing her part. Absolute will, or is it just a tantrum? You fight for your family's honor. But your mother has none. She sees you all as tools. You know nothing of my family. Katakuri roared, lunging again. I know she made Pudding show me her third eye. Naruto shouted, parrying a mochi-coated fist that could shatter steel. She wanted me to be disgusted. She wanted your sister to feel that pain. Is that love, Katakuri? Is that honor? The words struck harder than any punch. Katakuri faltered, just for a heartbeat. His body froze. His advanced haki, always focused on the immediate future of the fight, suddenly showed him a different vision. Not of the battle, but of the past. A flash of a memory. Pudding is a little girl, crying alone in a garden, her forehead bleeding from a rock one of their brothers had thrown. He remembered chasing them away. Standing over her as her silent protector. His iron composure, the bedrock of his identity, cracked. The future he saw, the certain future of Naruto's death, wavered, dissolving into 1,000 other possibilities. Naruto saw it in his eyes. The opening. But at that same moment, a shadow fell over them all. Big Mom, her face a mask of absolute fury, had finally had enough of watching her children fail. She rose to her full, terrifying height, her knuckles white as she gripped the fabric of reality itself. Enough. Her voice boomed, a sound that was not just heard, but felt, a seismic wave of raw GE that brought the entire battle to a screeching halt. I'll kill you myself. The symphony had reached its crescendo, and the conductor was about to take center stage. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Emperor's Fury. Big Mom's rage was a tangible force, a physical storm of malice that washed over the rooftop plaza. The sky, which had been a cheerful, candy pink, began to darken, bruised with shades of angry purple and black. The jaunty homies on the chateau walls screamed, their fixed smiles melting into expressions of terror. The very air grew thick and heavy, charged with a terrifying, primal power. This was not the calculated wrath of a queen whose plans had been foiled. This was the elemental, mindless fury of a force of nature. Wedding cake, she bellowed, her voice a crack of thunder. That rattled the teeth of everyone present. Her eyes, wide and bloodshot, were fixed on the cratered, ruined remains of the 10-tiered altar. It was more than a symbol of the failed wedding, it was a promise of a dessert she would now never get to eat. In the chaotic logic of Charlotte Linlin, this was the ultimate betrayal. Her hunger pangs, a legendary and terrifying affliction, had begun. You ruined it. She shrieked, her voice pitching into an unnerving, childlike wail. My cake, I'll make you pay, I'll take your lifespans, all of them. She opened her mouth, and from it poured not a sound, but a wave of raw, soul-stealing power. It was her Soru no Mi ability, magnified to a terrifying scale. It was an invisible, spiritual tsunami that demanded fear. Anyone who felt even a flicker of terror in the face of the Emperor would have their life force ripped from their body. Don't be afraid, Naruto roared, his voice cutting through the rising panic. He flared his own chakra, a golden sun of defiant, unwavering energy that pushed back against Big Mom's aura. His six-path sage mode erupted to life, his body cloaked in a blazing yellow light, the 9 truths seeking orbs manifesting behind him in a protective halo. His presence was a beacon of warmth and hope in the face of her cold, soul-crushing dread. For his friends, and for Pudding, it was enough. They held their ground, their wills fortified by his. But the thousands of guests and low-ranking family members were not so lucky. They screamed, their eyes wide with the primal fear Big Mom commanded, and wisps of pink, ethereal energy were ripped from their bodies, flowing towards the ravenous Emperor like rivers to the sea. Big Mom absorbed the stolen lifespan, her already colossal form seeming to swell with power. Her skin took on a reddish hue, her eyes glowed with malevolent energy. Prometheus, the sentient sun, and Zeus, the thundercloud, flew to her side, merging with her. She plucked Napoleon from her head, the bicorn hat transforming into a massive, jagged broadsword crackling with lightning and wreathed in flame. She was no longer a queen. She was a god of destruction. The plan has shifted. Shikamaru's voice was unnaturally calm in Naruto's ear, relayed by a clone that had tapped his shoulder. Objective is no longer neutralize command. Objective is survive and escape. No kidding. Naruto yelled back over the roaring wind, forming a massive Rasenshuriken in his hand, its blade screaming like a hurricane. Everyone, fall back. Get to the edge of the roof. He launched the attack, not at Big Mom herself, but at the ground in front of her, a strategic blast designed to create distance and obscure vision. The explosion of wind chakra tore a massive chunk out of the chateau, sending a cloud of pulverized cake and stone billowing into the air. For anyone else, it would have been a devastating blow. Big Mom swung her flaming, lightning-wreathed sword in a single, contemptuous arc. The resulting wave of concussive force and raw elemental power didn't just meet the Rasenshuriken, it devoured it, swallowing the complex jutsu whole before continuing on, a wall of pure destruction that threatened to annihilate the entire rooftop. Shit, Naruto cursed, manifesting a massive, golden chakra avatar of Kurama around himself and his team. The Nine-Tails head rose to meet the attack, its jaws open in a defiant roar. The impact was cataclysmic. The Kurama avatar shuddered, its golden form flickering as it absorbed the blow, the chateau groaning and cracking under the strain of such titanic forces clashing. The carefully planned battle had devolved into a desperate, chaotic scramble for survival. The Charlotte siblings, who moments before had been a coordinated fighting force, were now in disarray. Some tried to press the attack, while others scrambled to get out of the path of their mother's indiscriminate rampage. Sasuke, get pudding, Naruto yelled, his ice strained as he poured more chakra into the avatar to hold back Big Mom's relentless assault. Sasuke was already moving. He appeared beside Pudding, who was frozen, not by fear for herself, but by the horrifying, familiar sight of her mother's destructive tantrum. He grabbed her arm. Come on, we're leaving. But Pudding pulled back, her eyes wide. She looked past him, towards the lower levels where some of her younger, weaker siblings were trapped in the path of a collapsing wall. They were the same ones who had mocked her, who had thrown rocks. But in that moment, she didn't see her tormentors. She saw her family. She saw terrified children. Wait, she cried. In a move that surprised even herself, she broke free from Sasuke's grip and ran towards the danger. Brûlé, Anana, her half-sister, Brûlé, a tall, gangly woman with the power to create mirrors, was shielding their youngest sister, Anana, as the ceiling began to crumble above them. There was no escape. Pudding raised her hands, her face a mask of concentration. Her memo fruit powers, which she had only ever used for deception and cruelty under her mother's orders, flared to life with a new, protective purpose. She didn't touch them. She targeted the falling debris. A massive slab of stone and gingerbread, moments from crushing them, suddenly, forgot gravity. For just a second, its memory of falling was snipped away. It hung in the air, motionless, giving Brûlé just enough time to drag a stunned Anana out of the way before the slab crashed to the ground. Brûlé stared at Pudding, her eyes wide with disbelief. Pudding, the freak, the monster, had just saved her. Sasuke appeared beside Pudding again, grabbing her firmly. That was foolish. There was no praise in his voice, only cold pragmatism. But as he pulled her away, his Rinnegan flashed, and a small, almost invisible portal opened and closed, diverting another piece of falling debris that would have hit her. It was his own silent, begrudging acknowledgement. On the main battlefield, the situation was growing more dire. Big Mom was a walking natural disaster. Every swing of her sword leveled a section of her own castle. She was too big, too powerful, too mindlessly destructive to fight head-on. We can't beat her. We have to run, Naruto shouted, the Kurama avatar beginning to crack under the strain. He looked over at Katakuri, who stood amidst the chaos, a pillar of calm in the storm. He wasn't attacking. He was simply watching, his expression unreadable behind his scarf, as his mother tore their home apart in her blind rage. He was protecting his younger siblings, pulling them out of the way of her attacks, his face a mask of grim resignation. Their eyes met again across the battlefield. In that moment, Naruto saw not an enemy, but another man trying to protect his family. He held Katakuri's gaze and gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod towards the edge of the roof, towards the open sky. This is your chance to get them out, to save them from her. Katakuri's crimson eyes widened slightly. He understood. This rampaging monster was his mother, but Naruto Uzumaki, his enemy, was offering his siblings a chance at survival. The internal conflict, the crisis of conscience that Naruto's words had sparked earlier, now reached its breaking point. His loyalty to his family and his duty to his mother were at war. He made his choice. He would not help them escape. That would be the ultimate betrayal. But he would not stop them either. Big Mom lunged, her massive fist aimed at Naruto's Kurama avatar. Just as she was about to connect, a torrent of thick, sticky mochi erupted from the floor at her feet, clinging to her ankles. It was not enough to stop her, not even for a second. But it was enough to make her stumble. Her balance shifted, her punch going wide by a few crucial feet, smashing into the chateau and bringing an entire spire crashing down. It was a momentary opening, a silent act of defiance disguised as an attack on the enemy. It was all they needed. Now, Naruto roared. The Kurama avatar dissipated. He grabbed Shikamaru and Hinata, while Sasuke, holding Pudding, was already at the edge. Summoning Jutsu, Naruto bit his thumb and slammed his palm onto the crumbling rooftop. In a colossal explosion of smoke that dwarfed even the chaos of the battle, Gamabunta appeared in the sky above Whole Cake Island. The massive, pipe-smoking toad boss looked down, utterly bewildered. Naruto, what in the sweet, sticky hell is this place? The toad boss grumbled, his voice a bass rumble that shook the island. No time to explain, Bunta. Naruto shouted as he and the others leapt from the chateau, landing safely on the toad's broad, warty head. Just get us away from here. Fast. Gamabunta took one look at the enraged, house-sized woman roaring and smashing her own castle to pieces and wisely decided not to ask any more questions. With a single, mighty leap, he launched himself off the chateau, soaring through the air. Away from the collapsing epicenter of Big Mom's fury. From the crumbling rooftop, Katakuri watched them go. He stood alone, a silent, solitary figure against the backdrop of his mother's rage. He had made his choice, and the taste of it was as bitter as ash. As they flew through the air, the screams of the Emperor of the Sea echoing behind them, a chilling, furious sound that promised a long and bloody vendetta. Pudding looked back at her home. She saw the fire, the destruction, the chaos. It was the only world she had ever known, a beautiful, terrifying prison. And she was finally, impossibly, leaving it behind. Tears streamed down her face, tears of grief, of fear, and of a wild, terrifying, and utterly exhilarating freedom. They landed with a ground-shaking thud miles away, on a beach made of graham crackers. Gamabunta, with a final grumble about being summoned to the world's weirdest sweet shop, vanished in a puff of smoke. They were out. They were alive. They had done it. But they were not home yet. And the fury of an emperor was not a thing so easily outrun. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A new home, a new threat. The escape was a blur of adrenaline and impossible speed. One moment they were on Gamabunta's head, the acrid smoke of a ruined Todo land filling their lungs. The next, Naruto was weaving a complex series of hand signs, pouring the last of his Age mode chakra into a desperate reverse summoning jutsu. The world dissolved into a sickening, spatial vortex. For a heart-stopping second, they were nowhere, a disembodied consciousness adrift in the chaotic energies between dimensions. Then, with a violent lurch, reality snapped back into place. The air was clean. It tasted of pine, damp earth, and wood smoke. The cloying sweetness that had coated the back of their throats for days was gone. They stood in a clearing just outside Konoha's massive western gate, the familiar, comforting sight of the village walls rising before them. They were home. Shikamaru immediately collapsed onto the grass with a groan. I'm never eating cake again. But the respite was shattered before it could even begin. The air behind them began to shimmer, the same foul, greasy energy they had felt in Todo land twisting reality. The rift, which should have been a stable gateway, was tearing itself open again, a ragged, angry wound. He followed us, Sasuke snarled, his sword already in his hand, the Rinnegan in his left eye spinning to life. A figure burst through the unstable portal, wreathed in an aura of blistering heat that made the very air around him wave and distort. It was Charlotte Oven. His face was a mask of incandescent fury, his eyes burning with a zealot's conviction. Behind him, a small, heavily armed contingent of Big Mom pirates spilled out. Their expressions grim and determined. Traitors, Oven roared, his voice a guttural blast of sound and heat. "You will not escape the wrath of Mama. And you, Pudding, I will drag your treacherous hide back myself." He slammed his fist into the ground. A wave of intense heat radiated outwards, boiling the moisture in the grass, turning the earth to cracked, smoking clay. The Konoha guards on the wall shouted in alarm. The sounds of bells ringing and shinobi mobilizing echoing from within the village. Pudding flinched back, the ingrained terror of her brother's power momentarily overwhelming her. But then she saw Naruto step in front of her, a solid, unwavering wall between her and her past. He didn't even look back at her, his focus entirely on the new threat. That simple act of protection was a bolt of courage to her soul. "Sasuke, take the grunts," Naruto ordered, his voice calm and hard as steel. "Shikamaru, coordinate the barrier team. Hinata, watch Pudding." "What about you?" Shikamaru asked, already on his feet. Naruto cracked his knuckles, a feral grin spreading across his face. "I'm going to have a talk with my new brother-in-law." The battle was a shocking, brutal clash of worlds for the shinobi who witnessed it. Sasuke was a phantom of death among the pirate soldiers, his sword and chidori a blur of lightning that was everywhere at once. The pirates were strong, hardened veterans of the new world. But they were fighting a force beyond their comprehension, a man who could bend space and command black fire. But the main spectacle was Naruto versus Oven. Oven was a brawler, a tank who fought with overwhelming heat and brute force. He launched fists that could boil a river, his touch turning a tree to ash. It was a terrifying, destructive power. And it was utterly useless. Naruto met him head-on, his movements a symphony of controlled power. He flowed around the heat waves, the air shimmering around him. He didn't need the full Kurama avatar, he was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. He deflected a molten punch with an open palm, redirecting the force into the ground. When Oven tried to grab him, his body radiating a killing heat, Naruto's own chakra flared, a cool blue aura that neutralized the temperature, leaving Oven's hand clasping harmlessly onto his shoulder. "Is that all?" Naruto asked, his voice deceptively mild. Oven roared in frustration and unleashed his strongest attack, a massive heat blast that incinerated a wide swath of the forest. The Konoha shinobi on the walls braced themselves behind a hastily erected earth wall. Pudding watched, her heart in her throat. This was the power that had terrified her for years. And Naruto was standing in the middle of it. She saw her chance, her moment to prove she was no longer a victim. Oven focused his entire being on his attack, she acted. She didn't have her tools from her workshop, but she had her power. She pulled a small, smooth stone from the ground, focusing her will into it. A flicker of pink energy, almost invisible, shot from her hand and struck the back of Oven's neck. It wasn't a memory snip. It was a memory implant. A tiny, false memory. For a fraction of a second, Oven remembered leaving a critical weak point exposed on his back. His battle instincts screamed at him to cover it. He faltered, his massive heat blast flickering for just an instant as his focus broke. An instant was all Naruto needed. He was through the blast, a flash of orange and black. He didn't hit Oven with a Rasengan. He didn't even use a full force punch. He drove his fist into Oven's stomach with a sharp, explosive burst of chakra. It was a perfectly controlled blow, designed not to kill, but to incapacitate utterly. The air rushed from Oven's lungs in a pained whoosh, his eyes rolled back in his head, and the massive, heat-wreathed man collapsed like a felled tree. The oppressive heat vanished, leaving only the smell of burnt earth and a stunned silence. The remaining pirates, seeing their commander fall so easily, lost their nerve. Sasuke and the newly arrived Anbu squads dispatched them with ruthless efficiency. The battle was over. Pudding stood trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer exhilaration of defiance. She had done it. She had fought back. Naruto walked over to her, his grin returning. "Nice assist." She looked up at him, a thousand emotions swirling in her eyes. But she couldn't find the words. So she just nodded, a small, shy gesture that spoke volumes. Entering Konoha was, for Pudding, like stepping onto a new planet. Toto Land had been a world of vibrant, edible colors and crushing, monolithic architecture designed to make one feel small. Konoha was a world of natural greens and browns, of wood and stone and tile. It was built on a human scale. It felt real. The stares of the villagers were like 1,000 tiny needles. They looked at her with suspicion, fear, and morbid curiosity. She was the strange woman who had arrived with their hero, the cause of the monstrous attack on their gates. She instinctively pulled her bangs over her forehead, hiding her third eye, her shoulders hunched, a prisoner's posture she had never been able to unlearn. Naruto seemed to sense it. He slowed his pace to walk beside her. "Don't mind them," he said, his voice low. "They're good people. They're just not used to, well, any of this." He gestured vaguely, indicating the whole impossible situation. "They'll come around." She saw children chasing a dog through an alley, their laughter echoing off the walls. She saw an old woman haggling loudly with a fishmonger, their argument spirited but without malice. She saw teenagers training in a nearby field, their movements crisp and disciplined. No one was smiling with the strained, terrified bliss of Toto Land's citizens. No one was giving up their lifespan to exist. This was freedom. It was so open, so vast, it was terrifying. The political storm hit less than an hour later. They were convened in the Hokage's council room, the holographic forms of the other four Kage flickering into existence. Their faces were thunderous. "What in the name of the ancestors were you thinking, Naruto?" The Raikage, Darui, thundered, dispensing with any and all pleasantries. "We agreed to a political marriage, a reconnaissance mission. Not to declare war on an emperor and bring her enraged legions to our doorstep. My village's sensors picked up the energy signature of that attack," the Mizukage, Chojuro, said, his voice trembling slightly. "It was on par with a tailed beast. You have brought an S-class threat into our world." The accusations flew, a barrage of anger and fear. Naruto stood and took it, letting them vent. When they finally wound down, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "It was a trap," he said simply. "The wedding was an assassination plot. They intended to kill me and my team, then use the alliance as a pretext to study and invade our nations. I had no choice." "You always have a choice," Kuretsuchi shot back. "You could have retreated. Instead, you kidnapped the emperor's daughter." "I didn't kidnap her," Naruto said, his voice dropping, his gaze turning to Pudding, who stood silently in the corner, trying to make herself invisible. "I saved her." He told them everything. About Pudding's life, the abuse, her third eye. He told them how she had been forced to be a part of the assassination plot. And he told them how, at the critical moment, she had chosen to help them, to betray her own family at the risk of her own life. The Kage fell silent, their anger momentarily deflated by the raw human tragedy of the story. They looked at Pudding, truly looked at her for the first time, not as a political asset or a threat, but as a young woman who had been caught in a terrible position. Pudding felt their eyes on her and flinched. But then she felt Naruto's confidence, his unwavering belief in her. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and met their gazes. She swept her bangs aside, revealing her third eye, not with the mocking glee of her defensive persona, but with a quiet, vulnerable dignity. The silence in the room was profound. "She chose to stand with us," Naruto finished, his voice ringing with conviction. "She is a refugee, seeking asylum from a tyrant. And she is now under Konoha's protection. As far as I'm concerned, that means she is under the protection of all the allied shinobi forces." The debate continued, but the tone had shifted. The anger was replaced by wary calculation. This was no longer a simple problem. It was a moral one. The meeting ended without a firm resolution, but with a grudging agreement to increase patrols and share intelligence. For now, the alliance held. That evening, Naruto took Pudding to the one place in the village he went for quiet. They stood atop the Hokage monument, on the carved stone head of his father, the fourth Hokage. The village spread out below them, a sea of warm lights under the darkening sky. "I'm sorry," Pudding said, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. "I've brought so much trouble to your home." "This isn't your fault," Naruto said, his eyes on the village. "It's hers. Big Mom's. You just did what you had to do to survive." He turned to her, a small smile on his face. "Besides, my home is used to a little trouble. Especially from me." They stood in a kumfo. Our table silence for a moment before she asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "Why weren't you disgusted by my eye?" Naruto's smile faded, replaced by a distant, melancholic look. Because I grew up with people looking at me like I was a monster, he said, his hand unconsciously drifting to his stomach, where Kurama's seal had once been. They'd whisper when I walked past. They hated me and feared me for something inside me I couldn't control. I know what it feels like to have people judge you for a part of yourself you can't change. He told her about being a Jinchuriki. About his loneliness, his desperation for acknowledgement, his dream of becoming Hokage so people would finally have to see him for who he was. Pudding listened, her 3 eyes wide. She had thought her pain was a unique, solitary thing. But this man, this hero celebrated by his entire world, understood. He truly understood. She, in turn, told him more about her own life. About the brief, happy memories of her older sister, Lola. The only one who had ever been kind to her. About developing her cruel, mocking persona as a shield, a way to hurt others before they could hurt her. It was a quiet, halting confession. The sharing of scars under the watchful eyes of the Stone Hokage. The political marriage was a sham, a disaster. But here, in the quiet twilight, something real and genuine was beginning to take root. In the deepest, most secure cell of Konoha's intelligence division, Charlotte Oven awoke. He was shackled with chakra-suppressing seals, his body aching from Naruto's blow. His rage was a cold, hard stone in his gut. He had failed. He had been humiliated. He had let his mother down. He stewed in his own impotent fury, the darkness of the cell a reflection of his mood. And then, he heard it. A whisper, so faint, he thought it was the wind. So angry, so powerless. Oven's head snapped up. Who's there? He growled. The cell was empty. But the voice was back, seeming to echo not in the room, but inside his own skull. It was a dry, rasping sound, like ancient paper crumbling to dust. They mock you. The boy with the sun in his belly. He made you look like a fool. Your treacherous sister, she helped him. Shut up, Oven hissed, pulling at his chains. The seals flared, sending a jolt of pain through him. You want revenge, don't you? You want power. True power. Not the SC. Raps your mother gives you. Power to burn his world to the ground. Power to make them all pay. The voice was seductive. It stroked his pride, fed his rage, and offered a solution to his humiliation. Oven was a man of simple, violent convictions. He was not one for introspection. All he knew was the burning desire for vengeance. What are you? He whispered into the darkness. I am the answer, the voice whispered back. I can give you what you desire. Just let me in. A desperate, hungry look entered Charlotte Oven's eyes. In the suffocating silence of his prison, surrounded by enemies in a world that was not his own, he listened. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Whispers of the Void. The peace was a fragile membrane, and now it was beginning to tear. The first signs were not explosions or declarations of war, but whispers of a quiet and terrible wrongness seeping into the land. It began in a small, agrarian village a day's travel south of Konoha, a place of no strategic importance, known only for its sweet persimmons. A place no one would think to attack. Naruto stood in the middle of a persimmon grove, the afternoon sun casting long shadows through the trees. Beside him, Sakura's brow was furrowed, her green eyes clouded with a frustration he'd rarely seen in her. The village was silent, not peaceful, but unnervingly still. A farmer sat on his porch, staring with vacant eyes at his fields, which were overgrown with weeds. A weaver sat before her loom, her hands resting on a half-finished tapestry, her expression as blank as the undyed wool. They were alive, breathing, their bodies perfectly healthy. But their spirits had been hollowed out. I don't understand it, Naruto, Sakura said, her voice a low, troubled murmur as she retracted the glowing green chakra from her hand after examining the farmer. There are no toxins, no pathogens, no genjutsu I can detect. Physically, he's fine, but his will to live, it's just gone. It's like the flame inside him has been snuffed out. Naruto closed his eyes, casting his senses outward. He felt it, a faint, almost imperceptible residue in the air. It was the same greasy, unnatural energy from the rift, the same taint he'd sensed NGING to the jealousy of Pudding's siblings, but here it was diluted, spread thin like a poison in a well. It was an energy that fed on despair, that amplified apathy until it became a terminal condition. A plague of the soul. It's them, he said, his voice grim. It's connected to the world Big Mom came from. This was not a problem that could be solved with scalpels or antidotes. This was an attack on the very spirit of his people. A silent, insidious invasion that was more terrifying than any army. While Naruto confronted the spiritual sickness, a more conventional threat was making its first move. Miles away, at a critical communications relay tower that connected Konoha to the hidden sand village, a team of shinobi lay dead. They had not been killed in a blaze of jutsu. Their deaths were quiet, efficient, and brutal. Sai landed like a shadow, his ink birds circling overhead, their eyes his own. He surveyed the scene, his ex-Anbu instincts cataloging the details with cold precision. The guards' throats had been cut with a single, clean stroke. The tower's primary amplification crystal was gone, not shattered, but surgically removed. The work was professional, too professional. One of his ink mice scurried out from under the control panel, squeaking a silent report. He had found something. Sai knelt, tracing the faint outline of a footprint left in a patch of spilled oil on the floor. It was a heavy boot print, a design he had never seen before. Near it, a few grains of something white and crystalline. He brought it to his nose. Salt, sea salt. Suddenly, a strange, RHYTHMIC clicking sound echoed from a discarded communication device on the panel. Click-clack, click-clack, click-clack. It was a Den Mushi, a creature he'd only seen in the reports from Naruto's mission, looking bruised and half-dead. As he watched, its eyes opened, and a voice, cold and clear as ice, emerged. Report. Sai remained perfectly still, suppressing his presence. The voice waited a moment, then continued. A note of irritation entering its tone. Do not waste my time, agent. Is the shinobi relay disabled? After another moment of silence, the voice let out a sigh of contempt. Amateurs. No matter. The objective is complete. A pause. Let the ninja squabble amongst themselves, cut off from their allies. The world government sees their new friends for what they are, an existential threat. The age of hidden villages and their pet monsters is drawing to a close. The world requires the order of absolute justice, not the chaos of chakra. The Den Mushi's eyes closed, and it went dormant. Sai's blood ran cold. The world government, the other major power from the world of pirates. They weren't just watching. They were here. This wasn't a pirate raid. This was a black operation. A new enemy, disciplined and ideologically driven, was now moving in the shadows. The reports landed on Naruto's desk like stones, each one heavier than the last. The despair plague in the south. The sabotage of the Suna relay. Small, isolated incidents of shinobi patrols being found dead, killed with a strange, unknown martial art. The world he had fought to unite was being attacked from within and without. By enemies he couldn't see. They're testing our responses, Sasuke said, his single eye scanning the reports with a terrifying intensity. He stood in the Hokage's office, the Edding sun casting his long shadow across the floor. The Seraphim, as Sai's report calls this task force, is trying to isolate us. Big Mom's forces are likely preparing a full-scale invasion. And this plague is something else entirely. A third front. The plague is the key, Naruto insisted, his hands flat on the desk, his mind racing. The energy is the same. It's all connected. He looked at Sasuke. I need your help. I can track the source of this energy, but I don't know what I'll be looking for. Sasuke nodded. Where? Naruto's sage mode allowed him to follow the faint, foul threads of the void's energy. They led him and Sasuke deep into the ancient forests of the Land of Fire, to a place that had been old when Konoha was just a dream. The trees here were titans, their branches so thick they blotted out the sun, creating a perpetual twilight. The air was still and heavy. It was a place steeped in natural energy, which made the unnatural taint all the more jarring. It felt like a drop of oil in a cup of pure water. The trail ended at the foot of a moss-covered cliff face, hidden behind a curtain of waterfalls. An ancient, forgotten shrine was carved into the rock itself, its entrance flanked by two weathered, faceless statues. I've never seen this place before, Sasuke murmured, his Sharingan active, scanning the area for traps. It predates the village. Inside, the air was cold and stale. The walls were covered in faded carvings and scrolls, most of them rotten with age and damp. But in the center of the shrine, protected by a weak, flickering barrier of sage energy, was a single stone pedestal. On it lay a collection of scrolls, preserved but fragmented. They unrolled the delicate parchment. The script was archaic, a dialect from the time of the Sage of Six Paths himself. My brother and I, Sasuke read aloud, translating the difficult text, have faced a horror from beyond the stars. A hunger that is not life. The people call it the Void Eater. It whispers in the dark, promising power to the weak and vengeance to the scorned. It drinks the light from their souls, leaving only empty husks. Naruto's eyes widened. This was it. This was the plague. Sasuke continued to read from another fragment. It has no body, no mind as we know it. It is pure entropy, an endless appetite given a sliver of will. We cannot kill it, but we have found a way to seal it. The final, largest fragment contained a diagram. It showed two figures. One was unmistakably Hagoromo, the Sage of Six Paths, his rinnegan blazing. The other was a woman of immense size, wielding a flaming sun and a thundercloud. A wild, hungry grin on her face. Below them, a swirling vortex of shadow was being forced into a cage of light. The seal requires two worlds, Sasuke translated, his voice low with dawning horror. A lock and a key, each forged from a different reality. The sage of our world, and a matriarch of the endless appetite from another, worked in tandem. The seal is powered by the barrier between dimensions. As long as the worlds remained separate, the seal would hold for eternity. Naruto felt a chill that had nothing to do with the shrine's damp air. When the worlds bleed into one, he whispered. The prophetic words from the scroll sending a jolt through him, the seal of ages shall groan. The rift, the political marriage, the very alliance that was mean to forge peace was the crowbar prying open the door to an ancient, god-level prison. Their actions, born of a desire to prevent war, had inadvertently started the apocalypse. We need to tell the others, Naruto said, his mind reeling from the sheer scale of the revelation. We need to. A tremor shook the shrine. Not an earthquake. It was a shockwave, a pulse of dark, malevolent energy that erupted from the direction of Konoha. It was a concentrated, malignant spike of the same void energy they had been tracking. No, Naruto breathed, his eyes wide with dread. The prison. In the deepest cell of Konoha's prison. The whispers had reached their crescendo in Charlotte Oven's mind. He had embraced the voice, embraced the promise of power. He had let it in. The chakra-suppressing seals on his body began to glow. Not with blue light, but with a sickly purple, before corroding into black dust. The Anbu guards outside his cell felt the sudden, terrifying spike in energy and drew their blades. The iron door of the cell did not explode outward. It simply crumbled. The metal turned a brittle, lifeless gray, flaking away like ancient parchment. Charlotte Oven stepped out into the corridor. He was wreathed not in heat, but in a shadowy, black aura that seemed to drink the light from the torchlit hall. His eyes glowed with the same purple malevolence. You are not meant to be here, one of the Anbu captains said. His voice steady despite the unnatural fear crawling up his spine. This world is no longer yours, Oven replied, his voice a horrifying double echo of his own in the dry, rasping whisper of the Void Eater. It is merely the first course of the feast. He raised a hand. The shadows in the hallway coalesced, lashing out like whips. They didn't strike the guards, they passed through them. The shinobi cried out, not in pain, but in shock, as they felt their vitality being siphoned away. They aged before each other's eyes, their hair turning gray, their skin wrinkling. Their movements becoming slow and feeble. They collapsed to the floor, not dead, but ancient and withered, gasping for breath. Oven, the first champion of the void, walked past their broken forms, his new power a terrifying, life-draining plague. His rage was nothing compared to his hunger. And the feast had just begun. Naruto arrived back in his office to a scene of controlled chaos. The news of Oven's impossible escape was spreading. The weight of the prophecy, of the coming doom, settled on his shoulders like a mountain. For the first time since the darkest days of the war, he felt a flicker of genuine fear. Not for himself, but for everyone. This was an enemy beyond anything he had ever faced. A being of pure entropy. How do you fight the end of everything? Late that night, he found himself walking through the village. His mind a storm of impossible calculations. He ended up outside the small, quiet apartment building where Pudding was staying. He didn't know why he'd come. He just couldn't bear the silence of his own home. He found her on the small balcony, sketching in a notebook by the light of a paper lantern. She was drawing the Hokage monument, her strokes careful and precise. She looked up as he approached, a small, tentative smile gracing her lips. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long was gone from her eyes, replaced by a quiet watchfulness. "You look tired," she said softly. He leaned against the railing, looking out at the village lights, the same view he'd shared with her before, but now it felt fragile, like a candle in a rising wind. "We found something today," he said, his voice heavy. "This enemy, it's bigger than I thought. Bigger than the war. It's an older, darker thing." He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "I don't know if I'm strong enough this time." It was a confession of vulnerability he wouldn't dare make to Shikamaru or Sasuke. They needed him to be the unwavering pillar. But with her, with this girl who had shown him her own shattered soul, he didn't have to be a legend. He could just be Naruto. Put down her sketchbook. She didn't offer advice. She didn't panic. She simply moved closer and, after a moment's hesitation, placed a gentle hand on his arm. Her touch was warm, real. "When you found me in my workshop," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "you told me I wasn't alone anymore." She looked up, her three eyes meeting his, clear and resolute. "Neither are you." He looked at her, at this unlikely ally who had been forged in the fires of her family's betrayal. Her strength, her quiet resilience, was a balm to his frayed spirit. The prophecy was terrifying. The void was coming. But she was right. He wasn't facing it alone. The marriage that was supposed to save her had become a bond that might just save him. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Reluctant Alley. The corrupted oven was a walking plague. He moved through the land of fire not with the speed of a shinobi, but with the slow, inexorable dread of a creeping frost. Villages in his wake were not left burned, but silent and withered, their inhabitants aged and listless, their fields blighted, their trees turned to gray, brittle husks. He was a black hole of life, a conduit for the Void Eater's suffocating presence. Konoha's most elite shinobi were dispatched to stop him. Team Guy, with Rock Lee's blinding speed and Tenten's overwhelming arsenal, were the first to engage. Lee, a green comet of pure taijutsu, opened the 8 gates to the 6th gate, his body radiating a powerful, life-affirming aura. He was a blur of motion, landing 1,000 blows on the corrupted Charlotte. But it was like punching a void. The impacts made no sound, the force of his blows seemingly absorbed into the shadowy aura that wreathed oven. Lee's own movements became sluggish, his legendary stamina draining away at an alarming rate. The very life force that powered the 8 gates was being siphoned off. Tenten's bar, age of explosive kunai and paper bombs detonated against the aura, their fiery energy fizzling out like sparks in a vacuum. They were forced to retreat, their bodies weakened, their minds reeling from the sheer wrongness of their opponent. He wasn't just strong, he was the antithesis of the energy they used. Naruto stood before the strategic map in the Hokage Tower, the reports from Lee's team painting a grim picture. Shino Abarame's Kikaichu beetles, which fed on chakra, withered and died upon contact with Oven's aura. Hiba Inuzuka's fang over fang attack passed harmlessly through the shadows. This was not a problem that could be solved with conventional ninjutsu or taijutsu. "This dark energy," Naruto said, his fist clenching on the table, "it's not chakra. It consumes it. It consumes life. It's the power of the Void Eater. And it's from their world." His eyes darted between the grim faces of his friends. "We're fighting blind. We don't understand the properties of this power. We're trying to put out a chemical fire with water. Then we need someone who understands the chemistry," Shikamaru said, his voice heavy with the implication. He didn't need to say the name. It hung in the air, thick and unwelcome. "No," Sakura protested immediately. "Absolutely not. We can't trust him." "We don't have to trust him," Sasuke countered, his voice a low, cold rasp from the corner where he stood. "We just have to use him. This threat is greater than the Charlotte family. He may be an enemy, but he is not an idiot. He will understand the danger of extinction." The idea was insane. To willingly invite one of their most powerful enemies into the heart of their village. To ask for help from the man who had fully intended to watch them die at the wedding. But as Naruto looked at the map, At the creeping black stain of Oven's path inching ever closer to Konoha, he knew they were right. It was a desperate, terrible, necessary gamble. Getting a message to Toto Land was a challenge. Hat fell to the one man who reveled in the impossible and the taboo. Orochimaru, his serpentine eyes gleaming with a scientific curiosity that bordered on the perverse, was fascinated by the merging of worlds. He had been studying the residual energy of the rift, not as a threat, but as a phenomenal opportunity for research. A stable, two-way projection, you say? He mused, a wide, unsettling smile on his pale face. Difficult. Maintaining a connection across dimensional fabrics requires an immense and precise energy anchor. But, not impossible. He led them to one of his hidden laboratories, a place of sterile steel and humming arcane machinery. At its center was a device of his own creation, a modified sealing array, interwoven with technology salvaged from the debris of the moon during their battle with Tonari. Pudding-san, Orochimaru said, his voice silky. Your unique energy signature, your birth in that other world, will be the key. And Naruto-kun, your vast chakra reserves will be the fuel. This device will use her as a tuning fork and you as the engine to, shall we say, place a long-distance call. The process was unnerving. Pudding stood in the center of the array, her hands held out as wires and seals were attached to her. She looked at Naruto, her expression a mixture of fear and resolve. He gave her a reassuring nod and stepped onto his own platform, the array Lighting up as it began to draw on his and Kurama's immense power. The air crackled, the space in the center of the room beginning to shimmer and distort. It felt like the world was being stretched thin. In Toto Land, the chaos had subsided into a tense, simmering stalemate. Big Mom was in a foul mood, her rage banked but not extinguished. Katakuri was trying to hold the Empire together, a task made more difficult by the whispers of the Void Eater, which were amplifying the paranoia and resentment among his siblings. He was in the throne room, arguing with his mother about reinforcing their borders. When a homie chess piece scurried in, its face a mask of panic. Lord Katakuri, Mama, a ghost has appeared in the mirror hall. They found it in the grand hall of mirrors that Brule controlled. Floating in the center of the room was a shimmering, translucent image of Naruto and Pudding. It was grainy, flickering, like a poor transmission, but it was undeniably them. Big Mom's face contorted with rage. You dare show your face here. This isn't about us, Linlin, Naruto's voice echoed, distorted but firm. It's about your son, Oven, Perospero sneered, stepping forward. What about him? Has he captured you already, Peror and Tilda? Pudding stepped forward in the projection, her voice shaking but clear. Brother Oven is gone. She looked directly at Katakuri, her three eyes pleading for him to understand. Something has taken him, something from the legends. The whispers. The air in the throne room grew cold. The legends of the Void Eater were known to the oldest of the Charlotte children. Bedtime stories of a soul-devouring darkness used to frighten them into obedience. Naruto raised a hand, and the projection beside him shifted. It showed a new image, one captured by size ink birds from a safe distance. It was Oven. He stood in a withered field, wreathed in a life-draining black aura, his eyes glowing with a purple malevolence. The image was clear enough to see the shriveled, aged bodies of the shinobi who had tried to fight him. A wave of shock rippled through the Charlotte family. This was not their brother. This was a monster wearing his face. What is that? Brule whispered, horrified. It's a power that consumes life, that consumes souls, Naruto explained, his projected image locking eyes with Katakuri's. It is powered by an entity that was sealed away by our ancestors and yours. Our coming together, this alliance, is weakening its seal. This thing has corrupted Oven. It used his anger and his hatred as a doorway. It is a threat to both our worlds. It will not stop until it has consumed everything. Big Mom stared at the image, her usual bluster gone, replaced by a flicker of something that looked almost like fear. Her own soul-based powers were a mockery of this thing's absolute consumption. She recognized a predator that was higher on the food chain. We can't fight it alone, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. We don't understand this power. But you do. You've grown up with stories of it. Your haki allows you to sense spiritual energy in a way we can't. He paused, The insane, desperate gamble laid bare. Katakuri, we need your help. Not as my enemy, not as my brother-in-law. As a warrior, help us stop this monster before it's too late. The throne room was silent, the Charlotte siblings looking between the projection. Their monstrous mother, and their impossibly powerful brother. To ally with the people who had humiliated them, who had stolen their sister. It was unthinkable. Mama, mama, Big Mom finally roared with laughter, though it lacked its usual force. Help you, after you ruined my wedding. After you stole my daughter. You want my strongest son to fight your battles for you. Don't be absurd. Let this monster devour your world. It will be a fitting punishment. But Katakuri was not looking at his mother. He was looking at the projection of Pudding. He saw her standing tall, her voice clear. No longer the frightened, stuttering girl he had always protected. He saw the genuine terror in her eyes, not for herself, but for them all. He looked at the image of his corrupted brother. And his observation hockey screamed at him that this was a fundamental violation of the natural order. His duty was to his family. And this thing, this Void Eater, was a threat to his family on a scale that even his mother could not comprehend. I will go, Katakuri said, his voice low and absolute, cutting through his mother's laughter. Big Mom stopped laughing. Her head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with disbelief. What did you say? I will go, he repeated, turning to face her, his gaze unwavering. Oven is my brother. This is a stain on the Charlotte family name. I will be the one to erase it. And this entity, it is a threat to Toto land. I will not stand by and allow it to grow stronger. It was an act of quiet, seismic rebellion. He was not disobeying a direct order. But he was choosing a path that was not hers. For the first time, he was acting not as her perfect son, but as his own man, guided by his own principles. Naruto let out a breath he didn't know he was holding in Orochimaru's lab. Brûlé, he said, his projected image turning to the mirror woman. You can create a stable gateway. Bring him to these coordinates. A map of the land of fire appeared in the projection. We'll be waiting. The projection cut out, leaving the throne room in a stunned, heavy silence. A day later, at the designated coordinates in a remote, rocky valley, the air shimmered and warped. A mirror coalesced out of thin air, its surface rippling like water. From it, Charlotte Katakuri stepped out, his massive form seeming to dwarf the ancient trees. He was alone. Naruto stood waiting for him. Sasuke a silent shadow at his side. The tension between them was a physical thing, a humming wire of old enmity and new, fragile purpose. You came, Naruto said simply. This is not an alliance. Katakuri stated, his voice cold. I am here to eliminate a threat to my family. Once Oven is dealt with, we are enemies again. Fair enough, Naruto replied. Pudding stepped out from behind a large boulder. Hinata at her side, she looked at her older brother, the man who had been her silent protector and one of her greatest fears. She had expected him to ignore her, to look at her with contempt. Instead, Katakuri's gaze softened almost imperceptibly as he looked at her. He saw the new strength in her posture, the clarity in her three eyes. He gave a single, curt nod. It was not forgiveness. It was not an apology. It was an acknowledgement of her choice, and of her survival. For Pudding, it felt like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. The truce was set. The most unlikely, most volatile alliance had been forged. A shinobi hero, a vengeful Uchiha, a pirate's daughter, and the perfect son of an emperor, all standing together against a common, world-devouring foe. The air was heavy with the promise of the coming battle, a clash that would pit the best of two worlds against the encroaching darkness of the void. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Battle of Two Worlds. The silence of the valley was the silence of a tomb. It was a place where the vibrant green of the land of fire had surrendered to a creeping, unnatural gray. The trees were brittle skeletons. The riverbed a dry, cracked scar. In the center of this desolation, the air itself seemed to shudder, thin and unstable. This was where Oven was. He was no longer just a man, he had become a wound in the world. His life force is enormous, Hinata reported, her Byakugan active, her voice strained from the sheer wrongness of what she was seeing. But it's hollow, like a beacon made of shadows. They stood on a ridge overlooking the valley, a tense, volatile quartet, Naruto, Sasuke, Katakuri, and Pudding. Katakuri's eyes were narrowed, his advanced haki reaching into the immediate future. But the visions it showed him were a chaotic storm of blackness and screaming. He's not just rampaging, Katakuri said, his voice a low growl. He's gathering power. He is preparing to do something. As if on cue, Oven raised his hands to the sky. A guttural, multi-layered scream tore from his throat. His voice and the Void Eaters joined in a horrifying chorus. The sky cracked, not like lightning, but like fracturing glass. 1, then 3, then a dozen smaller rifts tore open, ragged vortexes of swirling shadow. And from them, they began to pour. They were vaguely humanoid, made of solidified shadow and animated by a chilling purple light. They had no faces, only a collective, gnawing hunger that radiated from them in waves. The minions of the Void Eater, spilling into their world like maggots from a corpse. He's using his own power as an anchor to pull them through, Sasuke surmised, his Sharingan spinning as he analyzed the flow of dark energy. Before they could even formulate a plan to attack, a piercing alarm shrieked through the link in Naruto's ear connecting him to Konoha's command center. It was Shikamaru's voice, sharp and urgent, with no trace of his usual laziness. Naruto, we have a second front. Multiple hostiles appearing off the coast. They're not from Todo land. They're military. The trap was sprung. The true, terrifying scope of their predicament was laid bare. This wasn't just a monster to be slain. It was a coordinated, multi-front war. Go, Katakuri said, surprising Naruto. He was looking at the horde of minions pouring into the valley, his expression grim. Your village needs you. I will handle my brother. No, Naruto said, his gaze fixed on the unfolding chaos. If we don't close these rifts, Konoha will just be the first village to fall. We fight here, together. He looked at Katakuri, a battlefield commander taking charge. My friends will protect our home. They've been doing it their whole lives. A flicker of absolute, unwavering faith passed between them. Katakuri gave a curt, sharp nod. The debate was over. The battle began without another word. Naruto and Katakuri charged down the ridge, a tsunami of orange and magenta against a tide of black. It was a study in contrasts. Naruto was an explosion of life and energy, shadow clones erupting into existence by the hundreds, each one a golden-skinned warrior wielding a Rasengan. He was a force of overwhelming, joyous destruction, a living sun burning away the shadows. Sage art. Massive Rasengan super barrage. He roared, and the valley floor lit up with 100 miniature suns. Each one obliterating dozens of the shadow minions. Katakuri, by contrast, was a force of precise, silent lethality. He moved like a dancer, his body flowing and contorting, a whirlwind of weaponized mochi. His fists, coated in hardened, obsidian black haki, punched clean holes through the minions. He didn't waste a single movement. Where Naruto was a wildfire, Katakuri was a scalpel. He used his observation haki to predict the flow of the horde, intercepting threats before they could form, his trident, Mogura, spinning in a deadly arc that cleaved through the shadow stuff as if it were water. Left flank is thin, Katakuri called out, his voice sharp. On it, Naruto yelled back, 100 clones converging on the weakness, shoring up the line. They were not friends, not allies, but for now, their powers, so wildly different, meshed with a terrifying, beautiful synergy. While they held the horde at bay, a different kind of battle was taking place in the chaos. Sasuke had identified the linchpins of the attack. Several of Oven's most loyal crewmates, now corrupted themselves, acting as lieutenants and directing the mindless minions with a semblance of strategy. Pudding, with me, Sasuke commanded. He became a flicker of lightning. He appeared beside a hulking, corrupted pirate who was about to smash a group of Naruto's clones. Before the pirate could react, Sasuke's Rinnegan flared. A Menetejikara. In a ripple of displaced space, he swapped places with Pudding. She was there for less than a heartbeat. Her hand, glowing with a faint pink energy, shot out and slapped the pirate's helmeted head. Sorry about this. Then Sasuke swapped them back just as the pirate's massive club came swinging down. The pirate froze. His eyes, glowing with purple energy, flickered with confusion. He looked at the minions to his left, then to the ones on his right. The memory of who was an ally and who was an enemy had been snipped from his mind. With a roar of confusion, he began swinging his club wildly, smashing his own troops to pieces. They moved across the battlefield like that, a devastating phantom duo. Sasuke's spatial manipulation created the impossible openings. And Pudding's power sowed a special kind of chaos, turning the enemy's strength against itself. She wasn't the trembling girl from the wedding anymore. Her face was set with concentration, her movements precise. She was a soldier. Back in Konoha, the assault was brutal. The soldiers of the Seraphim Task Force moved with a chilling, synchronized efficiency. They wore black, featural SS armor that seemed to dampen the effects of chakra, and they fought with the six powers, a martial art that allowed them to move at impossible speeds and strike with the force of cannonballs. They're bypassing the outer walls. A Jonin screamed in the command center. Force them into the narrow streets of the market district. Shikamaru ordered, his eyes darting across a dozen different screens. Sakura, I need you on the west side. Don't engage their commanders, just break the ground. Turn their advance into a climb. Choji, Lee, you're the vanguard. Break their formations. Sakura Haruno landed in the market square. 100 Seraphim soldiers charging toward her. Cha, she roared, slamming her chakra-infused fist into the ground. The earth erupted. Buildings cracked, the ground buckled and shattered, turning the flat street into a treacherous, broken landscape of jagged stone and deep fissures, swallowing dozens of soldiers whole. The combined force of the allied shinobi, summoned from Suna and Kumo and Iwa, held the line. Gaara's sand created impassable walls and crushing tombs. Darui's black lightning met the enemy's strange technology with overwhelming force. The village became a meat grinder. But for every Seraphim soldier that fell, 2 more seemed to take their place. This was a battle of attrition. In the Valley of Shadows, the tide was turning. They had fought their way through the horde, a path of dissolving minions in their wake, and now stood before the epicenter of the corruption, Oven. He was barely recognizable. The black, void aura around him was a vortex, pulling in the very light. The largest rift pulsed above him like a hungry mouth. He was a living gateway, and the key was his own life force. We have to close that rift. Naruto shouted over psychic howl emanating from the portal. That means we have to take him down. Naruto entered his 6 paths sage mode, a golden god against the encroaching darkness. Sasuke activated his perfect Susanoo, a colossal warrior of purple chakra. Katakuri's body began to glow, his mochi awakening, turning the very ground around him into a thick, white, sticky sea. They attacked as one. The Susanoo's blade swung down, cleaving the valley in 2. Katakuri sent tidal waves of hardened, hockey-infused mochi crashing into Oven. Naruto formed a tailed beast bomb Rasenshuriken, an attack with the power to level mountains. The void aura around Oven flared, meeting their attacks head-on. The Susanoo blade sizzled and dissolved. The mochi turned brittle and crumbled to dust. The Rasenshuriken imploded 100 feet from its target, its immense energy simply eaten. As their attacks failed, a wave of pure despair rolled out from Oven, a psychic attack from the Void Eater itself. It wasn't a genjutsu, it was a direct assault on the soul. Naruto saw images of his friends dying, of Konoha burning. Sasuke saw the Uchiha massacre, his own failures replaying in his mind. Katakuri saw his family, his siblings, being consumed by the void. Their faces masks of terror, his own perfection not enough to save them. Their resolve wavered. The Susanoo flickered. The golden light of Naruto's cloak dimmed. No, a voice cried out, clear and defiant. It was Pudding. The despair was washing over her too, showing her a lifetime of torment, of being called a monster. But she had a memory that was stronger. Memory of a boy with kind eyes looking at the part of her she hated most and calling it beautiful. A memory of a promise. She thrust her hands forward, not at Oven, but at her allies. Her power flared, not to snip or implant, but to project. She didn't share a false memory. She shared a real one. In their minds, Naruto, Sasuke, and Katakuri all felt it. They were in a warm, chocolate-scented workshop. They saw through Pudding's eyes as a young man with a blinding smile looked at her third eye without an ounce of disgust. They felt the jolt of pure, unadulterated shock. They felt the crumbling of a lifetime of walls. They felt the first, fragile, impossible flicker of hope. The wave of despair shattered against that single, perfect memory. The darkness receded from their minds, burned away by the light of that one act of kindness. Naruto looked at Sasuke, his golden eyes blazing with renewed fire. Sasuke met his gaze and nodded. They knew what they had to do. Katakuri, we need to pierce his aura. It's anchored to his real heart. Naruto yelled, remembering the flaw the hockey user had pointed out. I will create the opening. Katakuri roared. He slammed his hands into the ground. Flowing mochi. The sea of mochi around them rose up, not as a wave, but as 1,000 thick, powerful tendrils, all converging on Oven from every conceivable angle, a cage designed to constrict and hold. Naruto raised his hand, a Rasengan forming, swirling with a terrifying amount of natural energy. Sasuke. Sasuke's Rinnegan bled. Amaterasu. Black flames, said to be as hot as the sun and inextinguishable, erupted from his eye and coated the Rasengan. Life energy and the ultimate entropy, natural power and absolute destruction, all rolled into one paradoxical, terrifying sphere. The mochi cage slammed into Oven, his aura flaring as it fought back, consuming the tendrils. But there were too many. For a fraction of a second, his focus was split, the vortex of shadow around his chest thinning as he fought the constriction. It was the opening they needed. Naruto and Sasuke shot forward, their combined power held between them. They slammed the sage art, Amaterasu Rasengan directly into Oven's chest. There was no sound, no grand explosion. There was only a silent implosion of black fire and golden light. The world seemed to turn inside out. The void aura was not just destroyed, it was annihilated. Erased from existence by the paradoxical attack. The rifts in the sky wavered, then zipped shut with a sound like tearing fabric. The shadow minions on the battlefield dissolved into fine black dust. Their connection to their master severed. Oven collapsed to his knees, the light gone from his eyes. His body, no longer sustained by the void's power, began to wither, aging 100 years in a matter of seconds. Katakuri rushed to his side, catching his brother as he fell. Brother, Oven whispered, his voice his own again, but weak and thin as paper. His eyes were briefly clear, low, oaking at Katakuri with a flicker of his old self. But then they clouded over, and the rasping, ancient voice of the Void Eater spoke through him for the last time. This is nothing, it hissed, a sound of dry leaves skittering across gravestones. The vessel breaks, but the hunger remains. When the ninth seal shatters, he will come, he will eat the stars. With a final, rattling breath, Charlotte Oven's body crumbled into a pile of gray dust and scattered on the wind. Simultaneously, miles away in a scarred and smoking Konoha, the Seraphim Admiral watched the last of the rifts vanish. The anomaly has been neutralized, he said into his Den Den Mushi, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. We have sufficient data on their capabilities. He looked at the defiant, unbroken walls of Konoha. Order the retreat. Phase 1 is complete. The black ships turned as one and vanished into the horizon, leaving a wounded but victorious village behind. The battle was over. The valley was silent. Naruto, Sasuke, Katakuri, and Pudding stood in the lifeless gray dust, the echoes of the Void Eater's prophecy hanging in the air like a death shroud. They had won. They had saved their worlds, for now. But they all knew, with a chilling certainty, that the war had only just begun. Chapter 9 End.